Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting, public board meeting of the Health Education England board. Glad to see so many of you on screen. Particularly welcome to new colleagues as well. So let me kick off the meeting and begin. Any apologies, Nicola, that we need to note?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from Patrick Mitchell, Joe Lenihan, Harpreet Sood and John Latham.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next item, declarations of interest. They're set out in the paper. Are there any variations or amendments any colleague wishes to make? No, non-executive colleagues are shaking their heads at me. That's fine. Thank you. So let's move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the last meeting. That's our public board meeting from the beginning of this calendar year, January 22. So let me take them as a whole. Are there any matters of accuracy on the minutes of our January meeting that any member wishes to raise? Liz, please.
Yeah, just one thing that I thought that didn't make sense, which was something I'd said. We were talking about the digital programme, and at the end of the input from me, there's just a little phrase that said, "and the answer is yes." And I don't think it seems to relate to anything. So I don't know if it's gone in by mistake or cut and paste it. So I think that maybe needs to come out because it just doesn't relate to anything else in the paragraph.
What page are you on, Liz?
I'm on page 5 of 9. It just said at the end of my input, and the answer is yes. So I think it's maybe got cut and pasted from somewhere else, so it just needs to come out, I think, because there's no question really.
Quite possibly I was doing the minutes as I was talking to somebody else. And
You might have
what I was saying.
Yeah. And the rest of it was fine. It was that phrase.
So clearly, Nicola, the answer was yes in your conversation, but not in Liz's. So,
yeah.
And you normally make perfect sense, Liz, just to put the record straight. So, okay, any more people caught up in Nicola's conversation with whoever it was that want to correct the minute? Okay, all right. So, are there any matters arising any colleague wishes to raise? Again, I'll take all 9 pages all at once. Okay, so I think we can accept those with that correction from Liz, Nicola, as a record of our meeting in January. And Nicola, do you want to do the report 22.2a, which is a correction of the September 20 minutes? I don't think it needs an introduction. I think the report is very clear about the stray knot, and that's now been appropriately located. Whoever spotted it, thank you. I read these notes and I didn't spot it, so thank you for whoever spotted it. Are we content to accept that amendment? I think it is right, actually. As soon as I read the words, I thought, actually, you can see exactly what's happened here. Are we content to accept the amendment to the September minute? Okay, many thanks indeed for that. So the agenda planner, looking at the programme effectively to the end of this financial year, is set out. Is there anything you want to add to this, Nicola?
Just to advise members, we've updated diary invites to reflect that the workshop in April will be taking place in person in our office in London. Also, in discussion with yourself, Sir David, we will be updating the invite for the May public board meeting to also take place in person.
But that gives us the rhythm, and there's still some of the meetings to be confirmed in terms of dates, but I guess you're working with the chairs of each of the committees to just finalise that. So can we note that, because it's really a schedule of dates rather than agenda items. So if we just note that, and then move on to item 5, which is the report from the committee chairs. So I think it's very helpful, Nicholas, so thank you for this, for actually producing a written report to complement the oral update to come from each of the chairs. So first on the list is People and Culture Committee from 15th of February. Andrew, do you want to speak to this item?
Well, just to sort of emphasise two points and to add one more. So the emphasis really is on the ED&I strategy, which the People Committee has been discussing ever since it formed, and has seen significant progress in terms of strategy and setting objectives and so on, but is very keen to see an action plan. And I think the expectation is that action plan will be brought to the next People Committee. The second point to emphasise is the importance of people in the transition, and the role of the committee, which has been agreed here as supporting staff, supporting continuity, and trying to ensure that the good work that's being done on culture is transferred into the new organisation. And then the final point I wish to add, which is not in this report, is that in connection with the last of those, the continuing the culture into the new organisation, I've agreed to meet with Sir Andrew Morris, in fact later this week, to discuss how the People Committee of NHS E&I can work with the People Committee of HEE in this respect.
Well, thank you to both Andrews for that. That's really helpful. I think I sit on both, and while there are similarities, there are also differences as well. So teasing out those issues is really very, very helpful. So thank you. John Latham's not around, but we've got a written report of the Audit and Risk Committee on the 24th of February. Anybody from the Audit Committee membership want to speak to this item? Callum, do you want to add anything? I normally pick on you at this point.
I don't think there's anything particularly stand out to talk about. We used the time to discuss with our internal auditors the programme for the next 6 months ahead. Clearly, we're going to need to keep on top of that, given the transition and all the other issues that we're dealing with at the moment. So we use the time to have a good discussion on that, as well as discuss the internal audit work so far. But that because KPMG were only brought in the autumn, we expect most of that to be reported at the next meeting.
Yeah, and I had a meeting with them about finalising their audit plan for the coming year just last week, I think it was, and the point I was making to them is the importance of the work that we've got in front of us over this next 12 months. We'll pick this up in the business plan later, but it's effectively about delivery of our programme, the continued transformation of our approach to education and training, and then thirdly the transformation with the transfer of our responsibilities to the new organisation of NHS England as well. So they're the three foci in a sense for this current year, and an audit programme which helps with that. And I see that in the spirit that the two Andrews are meeting in relation to the People Committee function, I think there's now been a meeting between the chairs of audit committees as well to actually look at a joint approach to that, which I think is very appropriate. I think it's very pragmatic, very practical about not having three approaches to managing risk or more, but just to have one approach to managing the risk of the transfer of responsibilities. So yeah, okay, all right. And then third, but not last or least, is Andrew, the Performance and Business Committee, and there have been two meetings, the 28th of February and the 4th of March. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Yes, and I'll be brief. And I apologise that there were two meetings. That's incompetent chairing and too much business on one meeting. So I have a mea culpa there. We reviewed the performance report and also the business plan, but that's coming later to the meeting, so we won't discuss it here. I think it's really worth highlighting the fact that Bernard Marr has assessed the performance of HE and performance maturity and has noted that it's risen from level 3 to level 5, and that's on a 7-point scale. And I think that's testament to the team that have delivered it, but actually also to the wider HEE people, everyone in HEE who's contributed to that one. And we had a discussion about whether we should be going to level 6 or 7, and I think that depends around you know, how we move into the new organisation. Those are being done. We also looked together with the work that's been done in the audit committee on the NHS education contract, and that's laid out in this paper here, and I won't say any more unless anybody has anything they wish to raise about it. In light of your last comment, I've been in discussion with you, Sir David, and also with Navina around how do we interdigitate with the new into the new organisation, because it has to be while audit and people's committee there are equivalent bodies, there isn't an equivalent body in the current NHSE. There are individual functions and things like that, so that discussion is still ongoing as to how to best interdigitate that work with the into the new organisation. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions or pass them on to people better able to answer them than me.
Thanks, Andrew. Any questions, comments? Well, thanks to all three of you for the work that you've done. Important work, and it's good to see the quality of it. And Nicola, thanks for capturing that as a record, because I think that's then there for other people to actually just provide catch up, whether it's our staff or key stakeholders that want a sense of what we're doing and how we're doing it, and the fact that it's set out in this way, it becomes part of the record. Is very, very helpful. So thank you for that. So where do I go next? Next is Navina, your update. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. So board colleagues, you will have the written report alongside the rest of the papers, and the exec team and I will be happy to discuss issues that you want to. We've covered a huge amount of work in further medical education reform, supporting the recovery plans with NHS, the whole of the NHS, and also continuing our internal work around making HEE an anti-racist organisation. It's continued to be really busy in HEE, and we've seen progress in several key areas of our work. And as David reminded us when you visited the executive team earlier this week, really to focus on delivery, transformation and transition. And I think that's a really good way to summarise what we've got to prioritise this year. I just want to pick up on a couple of areas. First of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that our colleagues in HEE, together with the rest of the NHS, are very concerned about the situation in Ukraine, and therefore doing everything that we can to contribute to the coordinated efforts to support those who've been affected. The government have been providing support, and that has included working very closely with the rest of the international community. And in HEE, we've been also supporting this response and providing assistance where it's required. So our teams have worked really well with Nhs England and the department colleagues to provide assistance to health workers in Ukraine and surrounding countries. And also this includes upskilling healthcare staff within Ukraine, with supporting refugees and also based on their local needs. Also trying to identify longer term solutions to support education and training for those coming to the UK, especially in areas which would prioritise individuals who are returning to Ukraine in the future. So there's quite a lot of work happening in this space and will probably continue. Next, I just want to touch on our work around the strategic framework progress and also our input to the newly commissioned workforce strategy. I want to share that we've made quite a lot of progress in the development of the strategic framework for our long-term workforce planning. And since we last met at the board, we've continued to have structured engagement meetings, testing out our emerging thinking, and we are now turning this into a final product. So to let everyone know, the last of the 3 deliberative events will take place later this month. We will be able to test further insights and refine the product before we test with a wider audience. We're also continuing our series of roundtable events. And then Joe Lenahan, Rob Smith and others are also testing our thinking with key individuals, stakeholders, and also our own staff within HEE. An additional development since our last board is that the Secretary of State has announced in January that he's commissioned the NHS to develop a long-term workforce strategy. This will build on the strategic framework which we are developing, and it requires really close collaboration between ourselves, NHSE, and the department. I have discussed with Amanda and agreed that I will be acting SRO for the programme to deliver the strategy, reporting to Amanda as the CEO of Nhs England, who has responsibility for delivering this on behalf of the Secretary of State. So we're going to put together a tightly managed programme, which I am starting to scope right now. HEE colleagues, Nhs England colleagues, and also our department colleagues will be really working very closely to deliver this and making sure that this locks in with the planning for the long-term plan delivery, for recovery delivery, and also making sure that our strategic framework can inform this for the future. This work is really timely, not just for the health and care system, but also for us in HEE, as we develop our closer working relationships with our colleagues in Nhs England. So throughout this work, it's really clear that people in HEE continue to develop our partnership working from a national to local to ICS regional levels at every level, really. And we look forward to really firming this up, as David described, in terms of delivery, transformation and transition. Partnership work is crucially important. I want to just add one thing which is not in the report. There has been some news around the waiting list for foundation year jobs, and I think I will ask Wendy during the discussion to just elaborate on what the actual situation is for the record. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Navina. So why don't, Wendy, will you come in now and let's, this was covered, I've only read The Guardian this morning, so I don't know whether it's covered in any other newspapers, but certainly it's covered in The Guardian, so it's worth possibly just clearing up the current position in relation to foundation year training. So Wendy, please, and then I'll throw it open.
So just to reassure the board, this is not unusual at this stage because foundation programme allocation takes place over a period of months. So we're at the stage where we've done the first matching process, and that's where the majority of doctors will be offered their foundation placement. This year we've had more applicants than ever before. And we run a reserve list every year for those that either do not get their choices or reject them and go on to a reserve list. The reserve list is complicated now because international medical graduates can apply. There's no protection for UK graduates. And because we have to offer all of our UK graduates a registration, i.e. that F1 year, we have to go down the list of appointable doctors, and therefore we have a very large number of people ready to work in the foundation programme. I do not view this as oversupply. I view this as a group of doctors who will be incredibly well trained in a foundation programme, and then will be a pool of doctors ready to work and train in the NHS. However, we do not have a control over those numbers because we have to go down to the lowest achieving UK graduate in order to offer that registration year, which is our statutory requirement. So we have a very large number on the reserve list this year. It will get smaller as we shift through, and every doctor will get a job because that is the requirement for their registration. The way that happens is that this is obviously a full country challenge. So the reserve list allocations are shared proportionately across the United Kingdom, and each of us as commissioning organisations has to find the extra jobs. Callum is well used to this. We go through this each year. There will of course be different groups in that. There's the academic foundation programme. Quite a significant proportion of our foundation doctors are given what's called a priority programme, i.e. they're protected applicants. You might hear a little bit more about that later from Liz Hughes. But the primary list and the reserve list, we will work together with our colleagues in the service to create the extra posts necessary. And just to give you last year's figures, for example, we had 8,078 applicants last year. 6,800 odd were given a primary list placement, nearly 500 on the reserve list, of whom 2/3 were UK graduates. And what we've got this year is a greater number of applicants overall. So just to give you context, in 2021 we had nearly 500 reserves. In 2016 there were 45. So the scale of our challenge has significantly increased. But we know the NHS needs more doctors. We've not increased UK medical schools as yet, so that pipeline hasn't started flowing yet. So these are people who are deemed appointable into our system, and I think we should find a way of embracing them and actually offering them a future in the NHS. And the foundation programme is a really safe entry point for people. So I'm afraid that, as always, the media have taken one particular view of this. We are acutely aware of the anxiety of being on that reserve list for doctors, and there's a large package of support for them. We have brought forward the date in which we will tell people when they've got a post. But the opposite side of this is that people also withdraw from the foundation programme. Some of them will fail finals, sadly, but there are other reasons for withdrawal, and we often have unfilled foundation places at the end of this process, which again is a really difficult challenge for our colleagues in service, and indeed for our foundation programmes where the mix of people runs the programme better. So this is a really complicated picture, and once we have all of the figures I'm happy to share them, but it's a very movable feast now, which is why we tend to just put this list out so that people know, and then we work on the problem. I'll stop there, David.
Thanks, Wendy. And I don't know whether the website which prompted the comments that have been made might be updated just to capture some of the things that you've just shared, perhaps not in that detail, but just giving a sense there's a process to be followed here, and it's still got a number of weeks to run to its conclusion and finalisation. Yeah,
we do brief that always, and there's always media interest in this, and we brief it every year, David, but we will reiterate it again this year because I think the numbers are quite significant.
Well, it's one of those things where over communication is possibly the answer here. So, Andrew Foster, you've been very patient, so Andrew, over to you.
My question is for Navina. Thank you for the update, Navina, and I was particularly interested to hear the additional point that you're making about this new workforce plan, and very pleased that you've been appointed as the SRO for that. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about the scope and timetable of it, bearing in mind that the people plan was published last year, and the tricky issue of money and funding workforce increases. What's the headline at this stage of how that's going to be addressed?
So the headline at this stage is that we will be delivering this strategy in the autumn, and the scope is quite specific around the areas that you would expect, the integrated workforce planning, alignment with service plans, being able to think about the short, medium and long term. And it does also reference the link and connection to the strategic framework. So we're working very closely with the department to think through what that means, and with service to make sure that service transformation informs workforce transformation, which then informs workforce planning and then informs the numbers and then our education and training plans. So there's still some detail to be ironed out, Andrew, and I can probably bring that to a later meeting.
Thanks, Navina. I wonder whether I might just circulate the commission.
Yeah.
And that I think make a contribution.
Thank you.
Soraya, please.
Thank you, Navina, for the update. Probably this is more directed at Wendy. In terms of the posts for the recovery plan, I know, Wendy, that over the last couple of years there's been an increase in medical schools that are producing graduates that don't automatically go through to a foundation programme. I think there's a different mechanism, for example, if they're training international graduates. And I wondered what we were doing to try and help facilitate some of that, not to lose these qualified clinicians that have gone through an accredited programme that may not be an automatic path through. Are we doing any work around that?
Shall I come back on that, David?
Yeah, please.
Wendy,
sorry.
Yes, so they have open application, so it doesn't matter what nationality, what background, or what their intention is in terms of long-term work. So they are part of our increased pool. For example, the University of Buckingham, I think last year we took over 50. Nearly all of their graduates chose to apply to the foundation programme. I mean, it is one of the highly rated elements of training in the UK, so it's popular. I think the challenge is around post-foundation, trying to persuade people whether they want to stay or not, and there are some issues around that, but we're only just seeing that come through. But we work closely with all of the medical schools, regardless of denomination, shall we say. So it's open application.
Thanks, Wendy and Soraya. Andrew George.
Thank you. And if I could, I've got one question and then two comments. So the question is around the Ukraine. Really welcome all of the work that you've outlined, Navina. I saw the email from the RCP today saying there are 400 to 500 UK students, medical students in the Ukraine. I'm just wondering whether we're doing anything, what we're thinking about doing or doing anything around those students. They're obviously not our students, but we might have a way in which we can help them. Then a quick comment, the paper on multidisciplinary teams of surgery, I passed the web link, the open web link on to somebody who's leading surgery, and she found it incredibly useful and says it's a fantastic document. So I just want to feed that back to people, and was delighted with it and is now trying to promulgate it already 3 days later into her hospital. And I was also interested in the work about apprentices. I don't think it's time, there'll be time to go into that in detail. I'm really supportive of it, but it'd be really interesting to get a briefing about it, because one hears positives and one hears rumbles, as you would guess, from some of the more less reconstructed elements of the community, and so it would possibly be useful to keep on top of that as well. Thank you. But my question was around the Ukraine.
Thank you. Wendy, can I ask you to take that?
So Liz Hughes has been leading on this, working with Alan Robson and the GMC, and there are some really quite profound difficulties in terms of matches of programmes, Andrew, but it is something that people are working on to see what is possible. I'll obviously report back when there's any output from that, but Alan Robson's leading the discussions on that, and we're very much part of them.
Thank you.
The Department of Health, for those that might not know.
Sorry.
Liz.
Yeah, thanks to David, and thanks, Navina. My point was around the medical doctor degree apprenticeship as well. So great to see that this is progressing, and we're just waiting for ministerial sign off on the pay bands. it would be really great to see a bit more about this, and also maybe some comparisons with the new medical schools we've got who have been running foundation years to widen participation, and just over the years when they're running, just to see what works best and how we can develop it further, because it's great to see that we're going to have more young people who we wouldn't have seen in medical training before coming forward. So yeah, fantastic to see that.
David, I was wondering if we ought to perhaps do a separate session around the apprenticeships into medicine, because there seems to be quite a lot of interest. Yes, I can see some people nodding. Would that be?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea, and I do see this as being part of that second bit of our work focus for this year, which is about transformation and how we can really begin to accelerate some of the work that is being done on this. Yeah, so that'll be terrific. Actually, it plays to the forward plan, and just taking one of the slots on the forward plan, I think. Andrew Morris, please.
Thanks, David. Navina, really glad to see that you're going to be leading the longer term piece of work on workforce. I think that's really positive news. The concern I have, I suppose, is going into the coming financial year is what practical measures can we give to organisations to actually improve, the whole bit around recruitment and retention. And I think any joint work that we can do with, NHSE and I is really, really important here. I mean, I've just seen the latest data on the vacancy rates, and we're up, we've moved 2% the wrong way. So we've got 20,000 more vacancies than we did kind of 18 months ago. And I think there is a real kind of crisis building up here, and organisations will need some practical support and help from us. So it would be good to see that plan. I know we've got a joint session coming up on workforce, but I think a series of practical measures that we can offer organisations and systems would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Mark Radford.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's just coming on the back of the refugee challenges. Just to say that obviously there's a lot of work going on with medics, with Wendy and NHS England. There is an established refugee programme for nurses, midwives and others already working, has done a lot of work around refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan and Syria. We've been working with DHM number 10 about working with NHS England, who lead the programme in the Northwest, about the expansion of that. And also from a HEE perspective about onward career development opportunities, particularly around looking at access to programmes, be they nurse, midwifery, nursing associate opportunities, a wider recognition of that obviously many colleagues for this will be a period of time they may spend here within England, but would be returning back. We're also engaged with regulators as well to look about equivalency in terms of support for individuals that can work should they wish to return home as part of the potential reconstruction and the challenges, but obviously timeframes are very varied. But of course, what we've recognised from the outset is that the pastoral support, particularly trauma-informed mental health support for individuals as refugees is absolutely fundamental to get right alongside any support package. Again, working hand in glove with both NHSE and DHSE in this package, obviously with a few more areas to discuss in terms of what that might look like. But just to say the collaboration is working, but there's a whole suite of opportunity here in terms of potential support. And of course, not just for Ukrainian refugees, but other refugees from other parts of the globe that are in similar circumstances.
Very good, Mark. I wasn't aware of that infrastructure, but it's good to know that that's there and can be mobilised. Andrew Morris, your hand is still up. Do you want to come back in, or is it a legacy? Yeah, it's a legacy. Okay. Do you want the last word before I move off this, Navina?
Yeah, if I may, just to respond, Andrew, to your point, really important, and to give the board an update. I think since we announced the transition to the new organisation, there's a lot of greater collaboration at all levels. I mean, at local level and regional level, that's been happening anyway. But I think many of our colleagues on this call and elsewhere are working much more closely in terms of the workforce element of the recovery plan, and then the input into the long-term plan and other work. So you're absolutely right. And I think we feel that there's a real shift in the collaboration there. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So we then go to managing the transition, and Navina, this is, again is in your name, but do you want to kick it off? Is a nice sound coming through? Can I?
It starts off rather quiet and then it gets louder. I'm not quite sure why. So, like, it's really quiet now.
Is that getting better?
It's a bit better, but as you talk, it kind of gets louder and louder. It's curious.
Well, I don't know. Too old for this. Right. Well, let me be quiet and Navina, hand to you. It's I'm not the important voice here, so over to you.
So I am hoping that Philippa Spicer has joined us to answer questions. I'm not going to go through the paper necessarily because it basically lays out the work that we've been doing within HEE towards the transition and in partnership with the other organisations across NHS EI and Digital and X. So if I can, David, I think we'd be happy to take questions and comments, and Philippa is here with us.
So let's throw it open and invite questions, comments. I think it's helpful report, and a lot of the background work to bring in additional capability and capacity is, you can see, now procured and is now in place and beginning to do that work. So by definition, while that procurement went on, I think things have gone more slowly than perhaps we would otherwise have wanted, but I think there can now be some real acceleration of the work going through. So I guess a lot of what this report is doing is describing the process by which we're going to get the work going, and I think from now on in we'll be able to get into some of the detail of some of that work as it goes forward. But let's open it up and invite comments and contributions. Soraya, please.
Thank you. And Navina, having listened into quite a few of the engagement sessions and the open sessions you're doing, firstly, I think a really big thanks to the organisation for doing all of that. And and talking to staff, they've been really positive. The only area that I just wondered how we were managing, where we're identifying potential areas of risk of either people moving on and seeking these new opportunities that might well be within the organisation, but equally I think there's always people that will think to move perhaps sideways or whatever. How are we managing the risks in terms of our core business over the transition period? Thank you.
Thank you, Soraya. Shall I ask David Farrelly to come in to give you that, to respond to that, please, David?
Thank you. So a lot of the risk management we're doing now is both on day-to-day work is through the BAF infrastructure. So making sure that all the committees of the board are reviewing and reflecting on the BAF as part of their discussion, and we'll be aggregating that response to the board reporting session as we go. The infrastructure group that Philip has established will also be looking at its own risk register. But obviously the complexity is we'll have our own risk register for business as usual within HEE, which I'm sure the Performance Business Committee will want oversight of, and we'll also have the joint transition group risk register. So the trick for us is how we align all of that, but it's very important that we keep our own risk register for business as usual as we go through this year. In particular, I know I've raised it before at Performance Business Committee, is making sure that our resourcing is maintained through the year in terms of staffing, in terms of our core areas, in particular areas like postgrad medicine. So we're doing a particular piece of work in that area to make sure we understand the ongoing business need in terms of growth, and that we're looking at retention strategies to support any transition or increase in turnover later in the year.
Philippa, did you want to add anything to that, please?
Probably the only thing to add is that Vicky Matthews, who's on the call today, is also working with Helen Bullers in NHS England Improvement, looking at the kind of change framework that we'll have across all the organisations as we move forward, which is really important to make sure that you know, everybody is treated fairly and equitably, that we understand kind of gaps as they emerge, that there's no nobody thinks there's preferential treatment anywhere, which is some of the feedback that we've had. So that's a really important piece of work that's going to be taken forward, I think, in sort of phase one of the HR kind of people transition work stream. I can see Vicky's got her hand up, so she might want to add to that.
Yeah, come on, Vicky.
Thank you. Yeah, just to jump on that and to just sort of filter it down a bit, there's a few specific things that we're doing currently. If we look at HEE's workshop, we're going to start to work with leaders to build a retention risk register, so we can really see where are our critical roles and our critical people and what do we need to keep them, understanding that everyone of course will make their own decision, but really so we can sort of start to size the problem. There's also been some talk about what we do with recruitment during this transition period. Our inclination is not to put a recruitment freeze in, because we need to deliver our business, but we're going to work with leaders and say where you can act up within your own teams, or where you can have secondments within the effective organisations, then we should be doing that rather than bringing in new people where possible. And the last thing to say is we're already actively looking about where we can make joint appointments. So again, we can have colleagues from this organisation and others adding new strings to their bow as we go into fold into the new organisation.
Anybody want to come back on this? As I say, this is a programme which is beginning. It's been designed, it's been developed, and it's beginning now. And I think as we go forward over the coming months, there'll be much more meat in a sense of product from the work that is in place, whether that's KPMG, PA Consulting, the architecture that Philippa and Vicky have just shared with us. But I have to say, over my years where I've been involved in transition programmes, I recognise all the architecture that has been put in place and the work that is being described, and certainly I'm not sat here thinking there's something missing here. In fact, on the contrary, what I see is a lot of good professional transformation leadership in place, transition leadership in place, beginning to put the programme architecture in place, which will help us deliver the programme. All of that said, the rubber hits the road from the summer onwards in relation to the reality of this. So I think we just need to continue to be open-eyed about this. But and Navina, Philippa, Vicky, I think this is a really good, positive start. And I think the quality of the collaboration with EI colleagues is very, very high indeed. So I think it's good to see, actually. So in a strange way, I'm not worried about the transformation programme as currently set out and the way that this is developing. So I hope I speak on behalf of the rest of the board and just say well done for the work that you've done so far. And we shouldn't be complacent, and I don't think we are, but I think this is a very good start. So thank you for that. Well, if there's no more comments that colleagues wish to make, I'll move on, and I think we just I think we note this programme rather than are asked to do anything else with it. But let's go now to the agenda item 7.2, which is described as Health Education England Priorities 22-23. And there's a covering report and attachments to it. I'm not sure. Callum, are you going to kick this off? How do you want to play this, or is it Lee that's going to kick it off? Whichever one it is, I'll leave it to you to pick up the baton and take us through the discussion.
Thanks, David. It's me. So colleagues, obviously this is our last board meeting before the start of the new financial year, and it's important that we share publicly and with our stakeholders and providers and partners our intentions for the new year. So this paper brings together the 4 documents that make up our plan for next year. So there's the mandate, the indicative allocation and budget, which Callum will go through in a minute, the business plan that we delivered based on that allocation and budget, and the multi-professional education and training investment plan, which is effectively objective 1 in the business plan. All of these are currently the best place we can be, slightly indicative, because we're still waiting final sign-off from the Treasury for some of the budget, which Callum will talk about in a minute. And equally, there's still a few dots and crosses to be made and I's and T's around the mandate with NHS England and the department. But both the budget and the business plan are based on our expectation of what will happen next year. And basically, if anything changes from what is written in these documents, we will come back and update the board and have a further discussion about the impact those changes have on our budget or our business plan going forward. But what we want now is a conversation that takes us through these issues and gets the board to sign off these documents as they currently stand, and with the hope that they don't change once we get the sign off from the Treasury and DHSC and NHS England as appropriate. So I'm going to get Callum to talk about the budget, and then it's up to you, David, whether we have a conversation about the budget or whether I go straight into the business plan and we have a whole conversation at the end. So let's do budget first, so you can talk about how you want to play it at that stage.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. And let's do the budget and let Callum bring us up to date, because as you've said, it's framed by what our expectation / anticipation is of the resource envelope within which we're going to operate next year. And if there's any variation of that envelope, then we'll have to come back, and the title of the document is Priorities for 22-23. If there's any variation of the resource we've got available, then that will have an impact on the priorities, and we'll need to come back and just make that. But the reason it's here today is so we can send a signal to service providers in the NHS and to the universities of how we intend to invest the resources that we've got available for 22-23. So this is about sending a signal, and it's important we do this at the beginning of the financial year as we go forward. But Callum, I know there have been developments in the last week in relation to this. So since the papers were drafted and circulated. So if you just set that, and then we can come and Lee will take all the papers together and we can have a debate in the round. So Callum, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Lee, as well. OK, so I think we'd probably start off by just saying for the uninitiated that the plan that we're presenting here, the METIP plan, or to avoid the lingo, the multi-professional education training investment plan, so the activity numbers plans we've got here, and the consequent financial plans derived from those activity numbers, is something that we've been working with the Department of Health and NHS England really closely on for pretty much the last 12 months, and I'm very grateful for their support in this. And it genuinely is a shared plan, albeit one that HEE gets funded and enacts. So I think we're in a really good place in that regard, and certainly, you know, reference the previous conversation around about integration of organisations. We, through my eyes, I think we're already acting in a very integrated way, which is great. So our plans as set out here essentially are built around what we would call our sort of baseline commitments. So the training that we've started in previous years and the continuation of that, and the continuing new cohorts at the same level, that is in here, plus some what we call additional investments that are built around supporting long-term plan growth and of course recovery from COVID. And those are the plans that are set out here, and these have been worked on, as I say, with the department, with NHS England in great detail over a long period of time, and represent a balanced proposal as to how resources can be dedicated to our purpose. So what's set out here has changed a little bit, but let me just sort of say where we are now at. So the vast majority of the baseline has now been confirmed, not just by the Department of NHS England, but by the Treasury, and that essentially includes 375 million additional funding from the Department of Health via their overall spending review settlement. So that is really welcome, and that enables significant continued growth in training numbers, and also some important tariff reforms, which I will come to in a moment as well. So that is all additional resource towards education and training for the workforce. So that is good news. However, it's not quite as much as is set out in this paper, because 38 million has been essentially withheld from what's set out here, and we will need to find ways to manage how we handle that, what adaptations we will need to make to these plans. And as I've said, we would only want to do that once we've had discussions with our partners at NHS England and the Department of Health, and we'll bring that back to the board. That was only communicated yesterday, at the end of yesterday, so we haven't had any time really to progress the thinking around that. So I'm afraid that's just one we will have to return to. But as I say, that's 38 million reduction on what's set out here, but that still leaves us with 375 million of additional funding. So I don't want to get too focused just on the 38. What I would say though is that the additional investments, so this is additional activity we would like to initiate to support long-term plan and recovery, and has very much been agreed alongside NHS England and would be funded by NHS England. We are unable to progress that at the moment because we also need Treasury confirmation that can go ahead. So it's really critical that we can get that, because that's other than this 38 million, that is the missing part of this plan, and it equates to approximately 160 million of investment. So it is really important we get that so that we can get underway. We have already had to make some commitments against that, because that is the nature of training. If we hadn't done that, we wouldn't be able to we would not be able to get the activity delivered in the year. So we're already at risk to a degree. We also then do need to swiftly move on to looking at years 2 and 3 of the spending review and funding arrangements for HEE there, because obviously the current year will soon move on to the next. So that is where we stand. So the bulk of this plan as set out stands. We have a 38 million adjustment reduction that we will need to go back and review, and we are awaiting confirmation of these additional investments, but otherwise it does stand, and I would very much recommend that we approve this on the basis that we will come back as on the 38 million, and obviously I will update the board once we have approval for the additional investments. So that is where we currently stand. I will just say just a few words about tariffs as well, because as well as the significant growth in activity that's represented in this plan, we've also managed to achieve a proposal to reform across our education and training tariffs, which will support the growth in the areas that need to be supported and address some imbalances that we've actually had probably many years in the tariffs. And we'll support placement growth, which is really what HEE we're focused on. So what are these reforms to tariff rates? The details are in the paper, but essentially the major ones are putting primary and secondary care medical placements onto an equal footing, so that same rate will be applied for those, and that's the first time that's happened. We made some changes last year, bringing primary care up to 28,000 a year, but we've now actually equalised the two, although that does mean a reduction in the secondary care rate. But I'm pleased to say that we are significantly increasing clinical tariff rates from around about £3,800 to £5,000. That's an area where we're seeing sustained growth, and it's appropriate that as placements become scarcer, those are incentivised. We've also allowed for inflation on educator rates as well, which is also means that we're not passing on costs to the service in that regard as well. So there's a number of changes here which are very much in line with what we are trying to achieve as an organisation in terms of getting the placement growth, getting the activity growth in education and training. Clearly, as with any rebalancing of funding, there are some organisations that will do better and some will not do quite as well. However, overall, a lot of that impact is mitigated by the fact that overall activity numbers are going up. So in cash terms, very few organisations will be negatively affected. And we've done an impact analysis of this and compared our notes with NHS England on this to make sure that they were satisfied that no provider or area would be significantly effective, and they have a test for that, and we've made sure that we and agreed with them that we're not causing a problem in that regard. And we've also looked at how different areas are affected as well, and that's all been shared with our regions, and all regions will see an increase in overall cash funding. Two ICSs will see very small reductions, but they are within the very much within the boundaries of what NHS England would assess. So we've done as much work as we can on that. Happy to take questions around that. And I think the final point I would just like to ask, and it is a bit buried in the paper here, is just to say that we're now making very good progress in terms of planning for the year ahead with our regions and local teams. We do expect there will be movements in year, and we've discussed how those would be handled. Certainly what I would recommend to the board is if we have any slippage on plans that and expenditure, we would want to redirect that in the current year towards local workforce transformation priorities to support the development of the ICSs, to support the really urgent need to invest in the workforce to support recovery after COVID. So that was really the final point I was going to finish on. But yeah, happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Alan, that was really clear. So thanks, Lee, to you and to Callum for that. I'll open up in a second on all three papers which are on this item, just to give colleagues a steer. Callum, when you and I have spoken on the impact of the tariff changes, you mentioned the percentage, which I'm afraid I can't recall that NHS England use as a calculation of whether there's a material change. I think it was 0.75%, but can you just share with the board what that percentage is?
It's actually less than that. Their test is a negative impact on a provider of less than 0.15% of their operating income. So that's the NHS England threshold for supporting change, and we've obviously compared that, and we obviously want to make sure NHS England were in agreement about this as well. So we have done that, and they were supportive to take these changes forward.
We're satisfied that none of these changes in the way the impact on providers breach that percentage change, 0.125%, which is, I think, is important. It's you know, these are big budgets. I think some of the trusts use £500 million and plus, but actually that percentage is important. So really helpful to get that point. The other point that I'd just pull out, you know, as I've gone round both virtually and in real visits, what I've been struck by is just how much that local investment by our regional directors in both HEIs and in trusts has been valued by the trusts and the HEIs when it comes to simulation or additional equipment, and it's been a very powerful lever, I think, in those local discussions. So I think your point about prioritising any slippage on our investments during the year and your later report on our current level of performance, I think, suggests what the potential might be here, I think is a point well made. But let me throw this wide open now, and as I say, it's report 22.8, 22.8A and 22.8B, I think, is the scope for questions, comments from colleagues. So colleagues, over to you. Andrew, please.
Thank you, Callum. Very helpful explanation. Obviously a little bit disappointing that things aren't completely tied down with 2 weeks to go till the new year, and probably worth noting that, but equally not an unprecedented situation, as we've all known over several years. I just wanted to ask a bit about the impact analysis, which I think you said there were only 2 ICSs which were moderately affected. Have they been informed of this? Indeed, have ICSs in general been told about the impact analysis of these changes?
We have we released essentially the details of the tariff changes through the NHS England NHS Futures portal approximately 2 weeks ago. Don't actually quote me to the day, but essentially we were really keen to try and get that out, although we were also a bit wary of kind of committing before this was approved by Treasury, but we got to the point where we felt we really need to give some planning steers to systems. So that has gone out, and our regions have all been contacted and briefed on what this means. So I can't explicitly say whether the 2 ICSs have been discussed, have had the conversations. I would be very surprised if they hadn't, but I can't absolutely say they have. They're affected to the tune of approximately £100,000 each. It's that kind of level.
Perhaps we might, now we've got confirmation, Callum, just ask the regional director to proactively approach them and just confirm to them. Publishing something on a portal is fine for those people that look at portals. If you don't look at portals, then you probably haven't got any idea. And I have to say, I'm not a portal watcher myself, so this would have passed me by. But Andrew George, please.
Thank you. I think we're discussing the MTIP here as well, aren't we? Yeah. So very supportive of this, and the process, and most importantly, the process seems to have been gone through. That seems to be absolutely collaborative and all the rest of it. With the MTIP, what I can't see is, in terms of workforce, both of all stripes, what the delta is for any area. And how, because obviously as we are redistributing, and that's something that we are supportive of as a board, but I suppose we've just got to make sure that if doctors are going down in one area, that nurses are perhaps going up to compensate, because there tends to be one. Has that been considered, those cross those areas as well, and are ICS aware of workforce numbers changing?
Thank you, Andrew. I'll just give Hazel a quick cue up. She's Hazel Smith, who's my deputy responsible for METIP, might have some few words. But what I would say is that actually the story is growth pretty much in all areas at the moment. We are looking at redistribution of training posts, but that's not a big factor in this year at the moment, and is obviously something we're going to be handling with great sensitivity and so forth. So the story is very much significant growth in clinical numbers, and also growth in undergraduate medical numbers per the plan we set in motion several years ago. So I don't think there's anything really to be concerned about there. But Hazel, do you want to just quickly come in and comment on that?
Thank you, Callum. Yes, the only thing I'd add is that all of the METIP work has run through the regions, and they've had appropriate to each of their regional sizes of ICSs and relationships have gone through an engagement process to enable to inform those numbers. That's not to say that they wouldn't be wanting to do more, and there's more work that we're doing with Rob Smith's team looking at benchmarking at a regional level as well to inform those conversations going on for next year. But they have been the rationale that sits behind the numbers does reflect the local discussions with the ICSs.
Thank you.
Can I just add a supplementary follow up to that, because it's slightly extending this, but I know some areas are seeing the fact that they aren't getting HEE junior doctors training, looking at junior doctors, and therefore setting up CSER training programs, which are effectively look very much like HEE programs, but are self-funded. While we obviously have no control over that, we obviously need to be cognizant of that in terms of the numbers. So going forward with METIP, and these are quite substantial numbers I'm hearing in some regions that people are doing, how are we harvesting that information to feed into these numbers? Because I know they don't have a financial impact on us, but they have an impact on our other training processes.
I think just quickly, Andrew, I mean, obviously that's quite a potentially quite a big one to answer, but we are really focused on not just the training that's HE's providing, but other training that happens, whether it's trust funded or through subsidiary routes in that regard. And it's one of the things that we're really focused on addressing, or at least looking at with our partners as we continue to reform our education and training funding, and particularly as part of an integrated organisation, we need to take quite a fresh look at how this will work. And we prior to the integration being announced, we were expecting to go into a national engagement exercise around about that this spring. We've had to slightly pause that because of the transition. We kind of need to, I think, slightly approach it a little bit differently, but that will undoubtedly be happening in due course. And clearly those kind of issues have been around for a long time around about how those different training arrangements get funded and whether they should be rebalanced and so forth. So that's all. I think that's a bigger conversation for us to come back to as a board.
When would we do that, Callum? Because that is probably one of the things that needs to transition to NHS England at the end of the year. If we've not begun it, it certainly needs to be on the forward reform plan going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is, and as you know, the Treasury, not least as well, are interested in what we're doing around reform as well. So it is really important we do that. Hazel, do you want to just give us a very quick update on what the latest is on that?
Sorry, Callum, in terms of the...
In terms of engagement exercise and considering further changes to reform to tariffs.
Yes, so we what we've done with the reform that folk have seen today is ensure that we've taken the opportunity to move some key issues forward, particularly, as Callum said earlier, the undergraduate medical tariff for all settings being equal. What we do want to do is a far more ambitious piece of work which the Department of Health are very supportive with us doing. But we now have the opportunity, I think, which you've just articulated, with working with NHS England more closely in terms of, well, what could that mean going forwards. So what we're right at the beginning of the process at the moment in terms of scoping out what the conversation needs to be, because it will need to be a co-designed collaborative conversation. So we need to do that first stage of ensuring that we've got that piece of work done before we and then we'll need to bring that back to the board, I would have thought in about May, June time, in order to then go out to an even broader consultation. Certainly talking to NHSE colleagues, we'd very much like to do it in the way that they do their consultations on funding and tariff, which is extremely collaborative and takes everybody with them. So I'm glad that we haven't got into that more ambitious piece yet, and we have just tried to settle down a more consistent approach before we then go on to a more ambitious approach, taking on that opportunity of working even more closely with NHS England. But I think the points raised around postgraduate medicine in particular are really big issues that we really do need to get into and improve both the planning and the funding that sit behind that.
So this is to go on the forward plan of work. It's not for now. So let's park that. Andrew, George, I could see you nodding through some of that. So I think that's helpful clarification of the question that you raised. Lee, I will come to you to say something about the business plan. Sorry, I'm jumping between who's got their hand up and who's making a comment. But I'm not going to open up the redistribution conversation just at the minute. I think because we are going to bring it back. I think that's the point that I take from that conversation. I'm also mindful. Is it right? Am I right in just trying to summarise some of the conversation we've just had, saying because we've got more numbers coming through, we're redistributing more numbers, that this would be a more challenged conversation if we'd got fewer numbers coming through and we were trying to redistribute at the same time. It's a bit, Mark Radford makes this point about just the number of 18-year-olds we've now got in our population is increasing, so we can anticipate more people going away to university just because there's more 18-year-olds. So this is where demography is on our side in a sense, with that increased number of people
correct
into education.
This is a golden opportunity to make these changes, because they're very hard to do at other times, so we're really keen to do this.
Yeah, so this plays to the point why we must not let this slip, because redistributing an increasing number is a lot easier than redistributing a shrinking number. So whilst we're in a period of potentially in a period of growth, we should take the opportunity to do the redistribution as part of that. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right, it's worth just pulling that out and using that as part of the imperative about why we mustn't, amongst all the other work we're doing, we mustn't let this slip, because as a number of you have reminded me, this is work that you've wanted to do for a long period of time, and we mustn't let it slip this time. Soraya, please.
So David, just very quickly, I think it's really encouraging that we're going to work so closely with stakeholders, but I think the university sector, there will be, talking to some of my deans across the country that I've worked with before, different universities are going to be in a different situation in terms of their ability to increase numbers and also the impact of the fees that are coming forward. And I just wondered if we're doing a dedicated piece of work with a full range of HEI sectors nationally, and it may be something through the regions we'll get a better feel of where we're going to carry the greatest risks around the funding situation and also the ability to actually deliver some of this increase.
So thank you, Soraya, and absolutely, you know, we know that the HEI sector is under significant pressure. We haven't got a scheduled item on the overall position, but we do work closely with all HEIs through our local teams and through our National Head of Commissioning, Adam Leyland, who very much understands what's going on in the sector. So, I mean, if that's something that the board would like us to bring that back, then very happy to take that away and think about how we could best do that.
I think there's a piece of work about how we're working with the HEIs. There's certainly a number of us have got a dinner with the HEIs next week, I think it is, and we had a planning meeting very first thing this morning. So I think there probably is a general update on how we work with HEIs, where we could take some of those financial planning implications into that conversation as well. So rather than do it on a dedicated basis, I think, Navina, perhaps we should just sweep up a general update on working with the HEIs. In fact, I think we've got the April development session being a focus on our work with HEIs anyway. So can I invite Lee? Apologies, Lee, if I denied you the opportunity just to pull out some key points from the business plan. So if I invite you just to make some of the key points you want to draw attention to, that, and then we can open it up again.
I'll do that. Thank you, David. I'll be short. So obviously this business plan represents how we're going to spend all of Callum's money that you just talked about. And as I said earlier, that the METIP is part of this, and it's one of the objectives is effectively delivery of the METIP. But the thing I want to draw attention to are the meat of the objectives which support our goals, which are multi-year goals, are from pages 7 to 21. Topped and tailed in those objectives is all the work we're doing around recovery of the NHS and supporting colleagues across the system on that front. And then towards the end is effectively an overarching objective about inequalities and how the work we're doing will help both health inequalities, but also winding participation in health service. And that tops and tails the core of our deliverables, many of which are multi-year. So you'll recognise some of them from last year, which again reflects our multi-year nature of our business. So the 50,000 nurses and the GP, etc., are all still there. Good work continues on those. I want to pull up, obviously, attention to the fact that all of this will be done in the context of transition. So there's some work in there about how we're going to take this work to deliver it to the end of the financial year, but also position it as part of the new NHS England. But I want to draw attention also to the fact that below each of the objectives, with thanks to Andrew and his committee and the team in David's world that does performance, there are KPIs for each and every one of the objectives within the document, but also we've linked them to the board assurance framework opportunities. So we'll be able to show a direct link in this through this paper from our overall strategic goals, which come from our purpose, through our annual objectives, through how we're going to measure them, through our KPIs, and how those deliver the opportunities that we outline in our BAF, which provide assurance to the board that the work we're doing delivers against those opportunities. So hopefully we'll be able to show that as a flow throughout the entire work over the year. And just to say that in the foundations of success, we've added one new one, which is around sustainability. We are hopefully bringing a sustainability action plan out in April, which will talk about how we're going to support the Greener NHS initiative and the wider United Nations and UK government goals around sustainability. So I just want to pull those bits out, David. They're slightly different from previous years.
Very helpful, Lee. And I think this is very clearly written, but let me invite specific comments and contributions from colleagues if there are any to be made on this. I think board members have seen this on a number of occasions now, so it's not new. You've seen the iterations, and certainly partly my comments are a reflection of the amount of work that Lee and colleagues have put into getting this into a very plain English read, which flags, I think, the high level objectives we're looking to achieve. So can I, any comments, contributions anybody wishes to make on this? Andrew, George, please.
I mean, just to say that we did have a full 1 hour special meeting of the performance business where we went through this, and I'd also say that behind all of the KPIs there are key business questions that aren't in this document, because, and I think quite rightly, but provided the scaffolding to design the KPIs. So we have, so just to give some assurance that that we have been through this. Thank you.
No, thanks, Andrew, and thank you for you and colleagues doing that. I should have said that in my comments as well. Andrew Foster.
Yeah, this paper includes the continuing commitment to meet the 50,000 nurses target. And there's been some coverage of this in the trade journal over the last week or two about, I think there's been a recent publication by Nhs England, which shows a range of planning scenarios, I think, in some of which we do meet the 50,000 objective and the other we don't meet the 50,000 objective. And I'm just, you know, ever so slightly concerned that we get sort of put onto a hook of having said this can and will be done within the resources we've got, when there actually seems to be quite some doubt about that. So just wanted to ask what the current state of uncertainty about 50,000 nurses is, whether it's for Lee or possibly for Rob might be as good a one to answer this as any.
Or Mark.
Or Mark.
Yeah. Mark.
So David, yes, thanks. Yes, the DHSE published a response following the Health Select Committee, where the chair of the Health Select Committee asked for a detailed breakdown of the types of interventions that are going into the 50,000 programme, and also some of the approaches in relation to the calculated methodology. But of course, within that are a range of scenarios in relation to some level of certainty or uncertainty in some respects in relation to what we've been through. So the document obviously is publicly available, but indicates the three main strategies that we have in relation to 50,000 nurses, which is a strong focus on domestic supply, retention, as well as also international recruitment. And what's really evident as part of this programme, Andrew, is that actually we've been through obviously a global pandemic. So some of these interventions have shifted and changed quite rightly. There's a very dynamic approach in relation to this. We've seen very strong growth both in undergraduate and domestic production, both in undergraduate and postgraduate routes, as well as also the conversion from nursing associate into the registered nursing. But they're backloaded as part of the plan, so they don't start to flow through into the workforce until 23-24. Hence the balancing items within the plan of both retention and also international recruitment. Obviously that is led by our Nhs England colleagues, with the Chief People Officer team leading the retention strategy. So we obviously the paper itself indicates there are a wide range of strategies based on a number of uncertainties, such as what will happen to retention. You know, will we see greater leaver rates post-pandemic? Will other interventions mitigate that? What would the international labour market look like? What would we need to do to be able to maintain fantastic overseas colleagues joining the NHS? And again, what can we do around domestic supply, particularly around things like retention and also kind of what we call transition, that is moving from university into practice. So there are some wide range of scenarios in this, and I think from a planning perspective that's entirely appropriate to give an indication of what could happen should we not make further interventions into this, i.e. further international recruitment, further interventions in retention as an example, and work we're doing directly with universities around attrition from programmes. The programme board is very confident in being able to deliver. The document indicated that we were well on track to deliver the 50,000 nurses, and we'd achieved around about 27,000 of those as a direct growth from the 2019 point to current date. But of course, the level of uncertainty is we still have 2 years to go. So we need to make sure our interventions are aligned against those three pillars to ensure that actually each deliver to their maximum, so we're enabled to ensure that we deliver those, because 50,000 additional people working in the service will make a demonstrable difference to services up and down the country. The big question, of course, is what's after this. So further discussions need to take place in terms of what comes after 50,000 and 50,000 2.0 might be a really interesting question to ask around further growth, skill mix, changes, developments, as well as also multi-professional aspects of the way we deliver service models.
And Mark, really helpful. Just say something about where the HEE contribution to the 50,000 is. Not that we should detach ourselves from the 50,000, but it plays to the focus the board need to have on delivery for this year. And we made some commitments, and that's what the business plan is repeating, of those commitments to deliver from the new supply side. Nurses into the workforce. Can you just share with the board where your assessment is of our progress on that?
Yes, David, so thank you. Yeah, so obviously we've got a composite domestic supply programme of work. So I'll start firstly with the undergraduate supply. Colleagues will have seen the phenomenal growth we've seen in demand for nursing programmes. We've worked hand in glove with our placement providers and our universities to deal with that growth. So just to give that context, we've seen a 34% increase in the number of acceptances onto nursing programmes since 2018. Of course, they take 3 years to train, so that's really positive that they will start to come into the workforce, both in health and social care, which I'll come on to in a moment. Postgraduate is another really important area. This is a 2-year shortened programme. We've put a lot of work into those moving from graduate careers into nursing, as an example. That's grown actually from initial estimates. We usually have around about somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 per year prior to 2018. That's now around about 2,700, and we're doing more work this year because obviously they take 2 years to train, so they could come out into the workforce by 2024. The Apprentice Agenda is just phenomenal, and I can't praise the team enough for this, because apprentices are a really exciting opportunity for systems and individuals. They improve widening access and participation. They provide yes, they're slightly longer. So the registered nursing degree apprentice programme is 4 years, but we've seen a huge demand for this across the country. So we've far exceeded our demand profiles for registered nursing degree apprentice, and the same for the registered nursing associates converting to registered nurses. In fact, we set out an ambition for around about 1,400, 1,500, and actually we've got 3,100 people. And what is really exciting here is that we've actually got some programmes that are actually concluding the top up rather than the 24 months. They're doing this now in the 16 to 18 month time frame because they're building on the existing experience within the service. So again, we're looking to put additional cohorts of that programme on, as well as building the base of nursing associates. And the two other areas that we work on, of course, are attrition from programmes. We've done a lot of work over the last 5 years in improving attrition. Positive to see those gains being made. So we have around about 14% of students in the full 3 years of the programme step out of programmes. This traditionally was much higher. But we do have a delay group. So, one of the areas we're focused on at the moment is the pandemic's created a huge amount of disruption to the students. We have a number of students who are technically able to complete their programmes in a time-specific period by the NMC. So that's typically 3.5 to 4 years because of the disruption. And we've got a group of those currently coming out of universities who are delayed. So the domestic undergraduate is around about 1,800 people down on plans compared to where we are, because these people are waiting to flow through into the workforce. We expect that this year to rectify a much more stable undergraduate position right the way through to the end of 2024. And we've been doing obviously work with NHSE around return to practice, various different routes enabled to do that. So as Rob would say, all kind of levers, all interventions going into this package of work. And actually our focus now, having baked in undergraduate and postgraduate supply, is attrition, elements of return to practice, and that transition effect, the number of people who choose to work in the NHS, which usually sits around about 82 to 84%. Obviously is an area about making sure people have very strong recruitment profiles into the NHS, and importantly, they have great preceptorship and support when they arrive in practice. These students have had a really tough time, and actually they're asking us for some additional pastoral support and care when they enter their first jobs in the workforce. Again, something we're picking up directly with trusts.
Really helpful. And while you've got the floor, Mark, do you just want to say about the 18-year-old demography and just the projection of those over the next few years, because that also gives us some grounds for optimism, I think, play into the redistribution point as well.
Yes, so David, so one of the areas we've obviously seen in both undergraduate growth within nursing, midwifery and also other allied health professions, and this is a kind of unique, is we've had a demographic trough, as I think it's described, in terms of the number of 18-year-olds within population, and actually that is likely to now start to increase over the next 8 to 10 year horizon. So there's an automatic population driver in the number of people who would be choosing, even if we were to keep the number and percentage of students who go to university at the same level, there's just a population effect to do in there. We've done a bit of research with UCAS, HEE, looking at the drivers for people choosing health-based careers, particularly looking at nursing. And the pandemic has been a real driver of people choosing health-based careers. They've seen what the NHS and wider social care has achieved. So it actually is a very, very popular choice for many. And what we need to be mindful of is that actually there are some sub-regional changes to this position that we need to be mindful. So some areas are growing, some areas are more, not stagnant, that's probably the wrong word, growing at a slower level. And we also know that some of our regions are net exporters of students. Actually, they produce their students who go to work elsewhere in the country. So there's lots of interventions we need to work with around ICS level, and importantly through our offices of HEE, around making sure we've got a sustainable growth based upon population need. People are going to where they're needed, both in terms of jobs and employment, but we actually are thinking about the system of their employment across health and social care and other areas around things like widening access and participation and other opportunities that workforce careers bring to local communities that actually, again, HEE has a phenomenal role in playing in supporting individual systems to do.
It's a really important point, actually, Mark, because I think, you know, Andrew asked the question about the 50,000 quite correctly. And I just wonder over the next 12 months whether we should have more prominence in the debate about where we know we've got the shortage of types of nurses. I'm very much thinking hospital at homes requiring nurses that work in the community, and we know that's one of the issues that we need to address and do more on. But let's come back to that. Mark, thank you very much. Again, very, very clear and very, very helpful. It's about 10 past. I'm going to suggest we have a break for 10 minutes, a comfort break. We're making good time on the agenda and the timescales for the agenda. So I've got a couple of things that I wouldn't mind just pursuing. But let me call Rob and Giles. Rob, you first, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to Mark's description there. I would commend the DH report to colleagues if you're interested. It's a well written and well thought out piece, and that's because this is an exemplar of how we should be monitoring workforce development. And the key to that is that we are not just observing the start and end point, but we're observing the components, and that's allowing us to do the kind of plan, do, study, act approach that Mark's describing. You ask what's HEE's contribution, we're doing the numbers too. So most of the stuff in there is done by Tom Speller and the team using our HEE flow tool, and it's allowed people to understand the kind of dynamics and where we're achieving more and where we're achieving less, and therefore to take corrective action. And hopefully, Andrew, over time that'll do away with some of the, you can see people saying, I don't think that's true, that can't be true, can it? You know, but it is true, and one of the things is to get that truth out there so that people can quite rightly pick on the real risks, and we can discuss those appropriately, but that we unpack the myth, you know, that people can see what's going well, what's more challenging, and things like, as Mark has described, that some of the benefit will be end loaded, because that's the nature of the kind of training increases. So we've found this exercise really useful as an example of how we should do other work.
And Rob, I think you make the point very well, and I think the work that Joe is leading on the strategic framework is an example of taking scenarios to look at what the future might hold, rather than trying to go into forecasting and projections of what the numbers are absolutely going to be. And as soon as you do that, you're going to have a range of your numbers depending on what your assumptions are. But that's a good discipline to adopt the further out you're planning. So the point is, again, is well made. Giles, please.
Chairman, not wanting to prolong it, but just to observe that we've had a conversation with the NHS England Improvement Mandate team about their mandate, which of course is still also in development, and the flip side will be that the same themes, including delivery of commitments such as the 50,000 nurses and indeed on primary care, will feature in both, because clearly, you know, we together have a role in achieving the net growth there, along with the department too, of course, and so I think we're in a good and aligned place on that, and we'll be able to move forward now with the mandate discussions fairly rapidly, I hope. Perhaps, Navina, it might be appropriate also to mention that we put a global objective in the business plan, perhaps first time as prominently, and we have really rather helpfully had some positive confirmation in the last 24 hours from our Minister, Ed Arger, that he is supportive of our global strategy and indeed the direction of travel and what we're seeking to do. That is, although it doesn't feature in terms in the mandate, it does come with that ministerial support, as I understand it.
Okay, Navina's nodding, so I think that's a yes, Giles, so thank you for that. So could I just have a nibble at the business plan? Lee, could I encourage us to think about not referring to a new Framework 15? It seems to me that Framework 15 was a really excellent document for 2015. And if the world hasn't tipped on its axis in the last 3 weeks, it certainly has changed quite dramatically. So I think I'd like to encourage us to think about a strategic framework which acknowledges COVID as well as some of the wider changes which are taking place. So it's a small drafting point in my view. But interestingly, Mark talked about attrition, and I just wondered on some of the data. Andrew, this plays to the work that you and colleagues have done through the Performance Committee, which I think is good, because you can have too many layers of data coming in on a business plan and key indicators. But I did wonder whether, I'm trying to get the right page, apologies. Yeah, this is page 11, colleagues, where on the board assurance opportunities, there's some proposed KPIs which pick up on a number of the issues that we've just been debating, the 50,000 nurses, the 4,000 doctors, the manifesto commitments, but also some of the other areas we want to see a growth in supply. And I wrote on my draft of this when I went through the papers, should there be a figure on here for attrition as well? All these are the numbers coming in. This is the reservoir filling up, so to speak. But should we also be mindful and sighted on the attrition part of it as well? I don't think we should do retention from HEE's perspective, but I do think we should do well, let me rephrase this. Could I encourage us to think about whether attrition should be a number that we should be following? Mark, I'm just mindful, I think you and colleagues have done some really good work to begin to dig into the attrition figures. And I suspect we've got a better understanding of attrition as a consequence of that work than we've had hitherto. But I think as we go forward, and you know, my assessment of the impacts of the war in Ukraine is that the economy is going to tighten. I think being alert to what the attrition rates are is going to be a key issue when it comes to productivity of the investment in education and training, etc. So I'd just ask us to think a little bit about that. I don't need an answer now. If people think I'm in the wrong space, then I'm quite happy to be told that. The other query I'd got was on the METIP, and Callum, this might be something that you and Hazel, I was very pleased to see the very last table on the METIP report. This is page 4, which is a very, very detailed table of the numbers by profession and skill set which we want to see. And it was good to see that degree of granularity that has sat behind the METIP and to see those numbers. What made me pause and reflect, though, is there is a column there which is called national debt, and that's a column that has some numbers in which are not repeated through the regional columns, and I was just curious about that. Does that mean those numbers are not allocated out regionally, that they're being maintained centrally, or have we just not done the further detailed work? Am I making sense, Callum? You're looking curious at me.
I'm just trying to find it on the page, but I've got that. Yeah, to be honest, I don't know the answer to that. I think these are probably ones that have, there certainly will be ones that haven't yet been allocated out. Whether they will get allocated, I'm not sure. However, I mean, I think probably where I kind of know where you're going with this, and one of the things that we've been working really hard at this year is to get activity allocated right from the outset of the year to the regions, because it's the regions who do deliver 99% of the activity. And we have had issues in prior years where national plans have been, formed at a high level with good intent, but it's been quite a long way into the year before those have been given the granularity to get stuff allocated out to regions, and that's then causes the regions difficulty. We're way ahead of that this year. We have David Farrelly and I are going to have a meeting at the end of March to review where we've got to, but I'm expecting there to be a very small number of areas that have yet to be allocated out. And I've had myself and the team had a number of discussions with regional directors about this and so forth. So we're very much in a different place. In terms of that column, though, I'm not completely sure what it relates to off the top of my head, and I think Hazel's dropped off the call, so I'd have to come back to you on that.
So if you and David are having the conversation, perhaps what we could do in either a finance report in the future or a business plan update or Navina's report, if we could just update that, because you're right to anticipate where I was going with it, Callum, which is about actually our delivery of these things is done regionally and locally, and therefore I'd be looking to see a minimal number in that national column and the maximum numbers in the regional column, and that's what made me pause and just reflect on what this report was what I thought it was telling me, actually. But I'm satisfied with what you've said, and I saw Andrew George nodding his head, so that's perhaps something that well, I thought I saw you, Andrew. Perhaps that's something that the performance committee might have a look at in one of the conversations coming up on behalf of the wider board as well.
That would be good.
Okay. I think somebody's put their hand up. Let me just get back into that. Who's got their hand up?
It's me, David.
Oh, it's David Farrelly. David, please. Sorry.
It was just to build on that point. So I agree. I'd hope that most of these figures are waiting to be allocated rather than going to sit in a central place. So that would be the preference. We're focusing the April regional improvement forums to check with regions around their readiness in terms of their activity, their money, their metrics to start the year. And from the RIFs in April, that'll report directly to the PBC to give assurance to the Performance Business Committee that the regions have signed up to their metrics, their activity and their money. So hopefully by mid to late April we'll be in a good place with that.
So perhaps what we can do then, Nicola, is pick up in the May board meeting report from the Performance and Business Committee exactly that issue about how this has been settled. And maybe that's the route to actually see this through, David. You and Callum have your conversation, you go to the April Performance Committee, and then the report to this board at its May meeting is the way we can actually just get the clarity that all those central numbers have been allocated. Yeah, okay, all right, good all. Can I then come back to the covering report, which is where we began, and let me just get to the right place. I'm on page 9, and the conclusion and recommendations are set out in paragraphs 26, 27 and 28. So let just for the minute, 28 is a conclusion, so we don't need to make any decision on that. But 27 is the board is asked to approve the updated position on the proposed budget, so we can proceed once we've had HMT approval. Can I slightly rephrase that and invite us to approve the budget allocations as currently indicated? And then we can proceed. I think this is the point about that which we've got certainty on, we should get on and deliver, and acknowledge that there's some further work yet to do. So if I could invite us to consider that decision, is that acceptable to people? Yeah, okay, right, thumbs up and nodding heads, so thank you for that. We're then asked to note that there'll be further changes, so I think we can do that, and we'll be updated, Callum, through your further reports to the board. And I think that can either be a note that comes round outside of a meeting if it's done before then, and then confirmed at the board as well. So if we do that in real time. And then the board, lastly, in 29, are asked to approve the draft business plan, or the business plan as drafted, I think, because it may change. That's the point, I think, Lee, about some of the priorities might flex, and also agree the METIP for 22-23. And again, it sounds like there's going to be some further allocation of those numbers out to the regions rather than maintained centrally. But again, it's approval pending further developments, which will be notified to the board at a later date. Are we content as a board to agree the budget, the business plan and the METIP as drafted, acknowledging there's some further work to be undertaken before we can finalise them? Okay, thank you very much. That gets us through that. Can I suggest that we take a 5-minute comfort break now, and come back at 25 past? Yeah, okay, all right, thank you. Lee, Callum, thanks, really good. Are you okay with it, Nicola?
Yeah, always good, thank you, David.
Yeah, because I think we've got a decent chunk of time for this next chunk of the agenda as well.
Yeah.
I think all the heavy lifting was in that last session, so I thought we got enough time to do justice to that, and also given the fact that we've been through it 2 or 3 times previously, public and private, I thought the conversation was fine, so thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, David.
All right, I'll go and take your advice and go for a comfort break.
How's your shoulder, David? You're on mute.
Getting there, thanks, Wendy. It's all healed up nicely and the swelling and bruising's going, so but it's still a bit delicate. It doesn't like being moved really. And with my good hand, I actually cleaned the barbecue at the weekend, and it just didn't like the vibration you've got just going through the shoulder from scrubbing and rubbing and all that kind of stuff. So
Not entirely sure that's part of the physiotherapy regime, to be honest, David.
I've not mowed the lawn or done anything like that. You can do that one-handed, but it's
Well, sorry, Nick, are we still recording?
We are. I did pop a note into the chat as we went off to say that the live stream would continue during the break. I've just popped out and come back in. I'm not sure what. Have I missed something?
Just chat, I hope.
What are you talking about, Mike?
Only David's shoulder.
Okay.
Okay.
That's all right.
You missed my can on screen.
Wendy has just frowned at me, saying that I'm not.
You're not being a good patient.
I'm not being sensible. Yeah.
That's not.
In only the way a senior doctor could do that.
David, you should be role modelling.
It's that slightly looking down your nose bit. But I've got the message. Right, it's 25 past. Let's push on to the next stage. So we now come to section number 8 on the agenda, operational delivery and assurance, and 8.1 is the governance framework. So again, Lee, Nicola, I know this is done in conjunction with Cam and Alison, but I'll leave you guys to introduce this item.
Nicola is going to take the floor.
Thank you. So the paper is reasonably self-explanatory. This is a paper we bring to the board just before the start of each financial year relating to our standing orders, scheme of delegation and standing financial instructions. Additionally, I've put in a section related to the part of the Care Act which sets out the requirements about the composition of our board, and included a recommendation from Navina to the non-executive directors to appoint David Farrelly, our Deputy Chief Executive internally, as a voting executive member on the board. We reviewed the standing orders in light of the Being the Best Board We Can Be action plan that was agreed in July, and have included in the committee membership proposals executive directors being added onto the Performance and Business Committee and also to the Quality Committee. The Performance and Business Committee have reviewed their own terms of reference, and we've included some amendments within the annex that's presented. And on our standing financial instructions, we've got a small change to put forward, which reflects UK procurement regulations. On the scheme of delegation, Callum has advised that there may be matters coming forward that require us to review those, so we would propose rolling those over and bringing them to a future meeting in 2022.
Any questions or comments on this? Content. Can I just ask a question? There's a diagram on page 5 which says a quality committee is sat underneath the audit and risk committee. Should that thick blue line be there?
No, it should sit alongside.
Yeah.
I'll have a look at that and I'll make sure that that's amended.
Can can I just make the point that David F becoming an executive member, this is the legal entity of the board. So this isn't people in attendance. This means that David is actually a legal member of, a member of the legal board, the Health Education England board, which is set out in primary legislation. They should have a board, and this is a composition of the board, just to reinforce that point. So the recommendations are set out on the report on page 2, and that's 8 A, B, C, D, E. Are we content to agree those? Andrew Foster, sorry, Andrew, you've got your hand up, please.
Yeah, sorry, mine's more of a PS than anything else. It's just that I noticed that we haven't yet got any dates for the Quality Committee. It's established, it's confirmed in this document here, but it hasn't met yet. I just wanted to make that point.
That's correct. We're working on a programme of dates for the committee that will start in April.
Will start in April, will it? Okay, that's helpful, Nicola. Thank you. So I saw some notes. Can I just now that Andrew's clarified the meeting schedule, can I just ask for confirmation that we agree the recommendations in the report here? Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, okay. I'm going to take that. I've got one thumbs up. I think we mean it's okay. So 8.2 is the Q3 finance report. And we're asked to note this and agree the budget movements just to shape this, and the budget movements are set out. Callum, is there anything you want to draw attention to?
Just very quickly, really. Yeah, so yeah, we do need your approval for budget movements. They're in the normal course of business, though. There's nothing to particularly point out with those. So the report itself, Q3 indicates growing underspend. A lot of it COVID related stuff, slippage to start dates, which makes quite a big difference. Some vacant fellows posts, GP home visits, but pretty much nil expenditure on things like that at the moment. Some delays on around the progress of some of our developments, so moving training in primary care from 18 months to 24 months for GPs in primary care. That's slightly behind where we're expected to be. More ACP apprentices than expected means we don't have to fund them through other routes. It's a number of issues really across the board really, which combine to create the underspend that we're reporting here. So you know, the expenditure to date will come down a little bit, but it is quite a significant underspend at the end of the year. But this is another really difficult to manage year in terms of the impact of COVID and the predictability of that. Next year, I think we're going to be in a much tighter position than this. This is not something I'd expect to repeat. And I think I said earlier, the earlier part of this meeting, that we're in a much better place around budget setting this year, with national budgets being allocated much more clearly, much more granular calculation of existing commitments from our regions, and they are in, I think, pretty good shape to get their budgets ready to go at a detailed local level by the end of March, which means they can really use the whole year to focus on delivery rather than continuing to work over on what they're refining budgets and so forth in the first few months of the year. So I think we will see a real pickup in this next year. So I think those are the key points I would like to make.
Thank you, Callum. Andrew Foster, were you showing?
Yeah, Callum, your RAG ratings are almost always green, so my eye was attracted to a couple of reds, which is about bursary debt. And I assume this is not that we're slow at paying; it's people are slow at paying us.
Yeah, it's. I think we need to have a look at this again for future reporting. It's essentially we do carry a lot of debt that is very slow for students to repay, because a lot of it is on slow payment patterns, and a lot of it does tend to default. We've talked about this several occasions at Audit and Risk Committee. I'm very assured that we manage that as best we can under quite difficult circumstances, but it does unfortunately tend to flag up some red lights when you measure it against the normal measures for debt. So I think we need to do something about to reframe how we assess whether those are off track. I don't think that is an indication that anything is actually off track. So essentially, the flagging system isn't really working properly for those. So Andrew, that's one we need to look at.
Okay.
And you've set out on the table on page 3 what the outturn is and how that forecast underspend at the end of the year is broken down, and just where the contributions to that underspend are actually made, which I draw people's attention to, and I think it's a relatively clear statement of the explanation of why we are where we are. So again, helpfully clear, I think. Any more questions on this? So we're asked to note the performance. This is as at December, and also agree the budget movements, and they're set out on page 5. Are we content to note and approve in the way they're set out? Yeah, okay. Thank you, colleagues, for that. Callum, thank you for that. So that takes us to the performance report for Q3. That's 2211 and 2211A, I think. So David Farrelly, are you going to take us through this one?
Thank you, David. This is Q3 position, so just a couple of things I'd like to highlight really. We're on track to deliver 21 out of 23 business plan objectives, and there's a couple of areas which are off track that I just want to highlight, and then a couple of areas that I think we've already achieved the target at the end of Q3, which is good. So the two areas I want to highlight are part of the mental health programme around clinical psychology and child and adolescent psychiatry, where the delivery date is at the end of Q3, so it's a calendar year rather than a financial year. With clinical psychology, the year-end position was 890 against 914, so about 97% of targets achieved. And with the child and adolescent, it was 58 out of 76, which is about 76% of target. Now it's retained at Amber because this is one component of a whole range of activity within the mental health programme, which includes peer support workers, IAP targets, perinatal, postgraduate training, health and wellbeing. So it's a part of the programme, but the one part that should deliver by the end of December. Another area that we've highlighted as Amber is around ACPs, largely due to the activity of those who would become advanced practitioners, being senior practitioners and being utilised in service through Omicron. However, the position states about 350 against 1,000 targets, but what we have got now is an e-learning portfolio with 900 applicants against it. So we're just going through the conversion of that. We won't know till May how many of the 900 convert, but we're looking to get 650 to convert from that programme, which will then take us nearer to the target delivery for the end of March. Another target I just want to highlight, that's not a business plan target, but it's been of importance to us, which was around trainee nurse associates. The year-end target is 5,000 to be delivered by the end of December, and it's a calendar year. We landed at 4,652, so about 93% of target. On trajectory right through up to November, and obviously with Omicron, the last 6 weeks was where that converted differently. There's a number of things here that are probably quite interesting to just think about. One is where we've had a particular gap in one of our regions. What we did see was a significant increase in apprentice routes. So they sort of doubled what most of the other regions were in terms of the apprentice participation rate. So there's obviously some around choices in terms of supply routes being taken. We are doing a couple of deep dives in areas that are consistently finding it difficult to deliver against the targets. So with Mark and his central team, we're looking at whether it's the supply model that providers are looking at, whether it's the architecture to support the delivery, or what it is. So we're doing that work now. We have been able to carry forward the gap of this target into the 22-23 year, and we have plans in place for full delivery of that target that started in January. So we're working with regions now to make sure that we can top load as best we can the numbers, so we don't have this year-end issue as we get into the winter and look more around Q3 completion of delivery. So we'll keep monitoring that through the regional improvement forums to make sure we're on track with that. Just a couple of the positive side, there are a couple of areas where we believe that we've already hit the target at Q3. So GP recruitment numbers have been on track for the over 4,000. Endoscopy as well, we had a target for over 2 years, 200 a year to deliver 400, and we're over that target already. And midwifery expansion, we're in the last year of a 4-year growth plan, and we have about hit 1,000 plus for this year, going at the end of Q3. So they're the main areas, David, I wanted to highlight. And other areas that we think will be on track, but we won't get confirmation till into April this year. But we're fairly confident that all of the other numbers will be delivered. Thanks, David.
No, David, thank you, and well done. There's a lot of work there, and it's good to see where you're ahead of target as well. But David, if you've already said this, and I wasn't concentrating hard enough, forgive me. But on the two which we're rating amber at the present time, particularly the ones around increasing the supply of people trained to fill the roles to enable the delivery of the LTP and mental health, are you optimistic that, notwithstanding the calendar versus financial year dates, etc., that will recover to meet what we set out to do? I wasn't clear when I read the paper of the work that is going on, whether you anticipate we'll be able to recover, whereas I did take that conclusion from the way you updated us on the advanced clinical practitioners. I was more optimistic, having read the report, that we'd hit that. But can you just help me better understand?
Yeah, it's logic. Yes, we can increase. It requires us to increase the capacity in higher education to do the programs that we want. At the moment, we've not been able to support the HEIs to deliver their infrastructure capacity because of the outcome of the spending review. As soon as we understand the outcome of the spending review, we can work with the university sector to look at increasing that capacity to deliver the numbers we need. So on that basis, we would be able to pull back on the numbers that we've got to so far.
So this is the point that we touched on the finance and business plan report about just working through the precise implications and of the settlement that we know we've got pending the finalisation of that settlement. Yeah, okay, all right, that's clear. It's clear. Any questions from colleagues in relation to the update on the performance report from David? No, okay. David, thanks to you and colleagues. Again, very, very clear report, which is very helpful. So thank you to you and colleagues for that. That then brings me to the education contracts implementation report, and I'm not sure. Callum, are you introducing this, or is Adam Leyland joining us for this?
I think I'm handling this one. Yeah. So essentially, John's obviously not here, is he? But he was keen that we did make sure that we had sight at board level of key internal audit reports, and we undertook a major overhaul of our contracts within HEE last year, and the implementation of that has been looked at by our internal auditors, KPMG, and that is the report that you see in front of you. And it does make a number of really important recommendations that I think John and I were keen that were at least on in people's sight on the board. So it's particularly, I think, important that these issues are resolved because of the integration. We need to make sure that we are clear on our contracting arrangements, and we've got those secured as we inherently obviously head for a period of transition. So it's probably worth commenting, of course, that NHS England business is somewhat different, and they operate in a different way to us, and the way we commission contract in HEE, they don't really have anything quite like that directly. Someone said to me it's almost like HEE is a kind of it's almost kind of an ICS in a way, you know. It's kind of operating at that level in terms of commissioning and contracting. So anyway, you've got the report. I won't go through the detail, but there are, I guess, three probably main areas that we're particularly focusing on here. One is that our regional teams are complete the process of converting to the new contracting regime and contracts, and they need to do that on a timely basis, but they also do need the guidance and support from the national team to do that, and you'll see there's some recommendations around that. Secondly, and I was talking to our regional directors about this just a few days ago, is that we've got some work to do around reflecting on the process and how it affects particularly primary care and smaller providers, because we have quite a weighty contract which is, you know, being worked up in a lot of detail about the requirements on placement providers to make sure that placements have the right quality and have all the right terms and conditions and mechanisms around them. The problem is that ends up in quite a weighty contract that is difficult to implement in organisations that are doing really quite a small amount of training. However, some of those small areas, those small training providers, placement providers, are really important to us because they tend to be in things like primary care where we are trying to grow, and in the independent sector, because that's where there is the capacity to grow placements, and it also gives the diversity of experience, the quality of experience that the trainees are going to need. So we do need to resolve this, and it's not an easy one between kind of getting a comprehensive set of contractual conditions versus one that's deliverable and easily understood on the ground and smaller organisations can sign up to. So we've got some work to do there. The third area is around making sure that our regions have a consistent infrastructure for making sure that they are handling the contract management side of things, the use of our contract system, etc., because again, that's really important sort of organisational hygiene in terms of how we operate, and making sure that we've got sight of all the contracts and impacts on things like making sure that we're complying with our data security and so forth. So there's a number of points in there. I won't go through details, but those for me are the three areas we need to focus on. I think the report explains that Adam and the team are already working with the regional teams to kind of tackle those. It is a work in progress, but I think what I'd finish off by saying is I think this is a really important area for KPMG to quickly come back to later this year and report and follow up on implementation to make sure that we are on track with doing that. So I think that's all I was going to say, but happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Could you just say why John wanted this along with yourself to come to the board? So I think this is the first time in 12 months that a report has been escalated from a committee to the board. I'm personally completely relaxed about that, but it's probably worth just sharing with colleagues, Callum, why John was along with yourself, was minded to bring it to our attention?
I don't know whether there was I'm not sure whether there was a specific reason for this one. I think it's just because it was an important part of our organisational development, because of the link to transition and integration. And I think we just felt it would be it was probably worth giving the board a little bit more closer sight of what was going on through our audits and the Audit and Risk Committee. So hopefully this actually won't be the first one. I don't think we want to draw these out, but I think it is quite good to be able to just highlight key reports, and we felt this was probably a good example to bring. Andrew's got his hand up though, and is a member of the committee, so you may want to come in.
I'll open it up. So
Elizabeth.
Liz has got Liz first, so if I may go to Liz first, and then I'll come to you, Andrew. But yeah, Liz, please.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks, Callum. So we did have an in-depth discussion about this at Audit Committee, and when I went through the report, we're talking about there's a job description that we've got as an exemplar from 2 of the regions, but as I understand it, we're not saying we should have a contract manager job in every region. We're going to look region by region at what would fit and customise what we need to their circumstances. Is that right? Am I reading that right?
I think what we need to do is make sure that all regions, it's not telling them how to do it, but we need to make sure they're able to perform the necessary functions to make sure that we have got contracts being properly managed, being updated to the systems, etc. So I think it is up to our regional directors to assess how best to achieve that. So yeah, I don't think we're into specifying an absolute precise standard sort of cookie cutter structure.
So just following on from that, Callum, then we could then measure that in terms of progress and just see what's working and just make sure that regions have. We're talking about upskilling, aren't we? That they've done that in the right way for them.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
George.
So so also to say that this also went to, I'm on the Audit Committee, but it also went to the Performance and Management Committee, because the Audit Committee was felt it impinged on performance issues as well. Just say Adam also came and presented in it. I think the KPMG audit was a really good one. It was a very helpful one, and it outlined, as Callum has said, things that need to be implemented and also processes that need to be established. And some of the fixes are fairly short term and some of the fixes are fairly long term. So I think it was a really useful audit. I think we were assured from everything that was done that the plan is a plan that will address these, and clearly we need to return to it in due course and check that's happened. But there's some quick fixes there, but there are some cultural things that will take some time, and I think it's that mix of the 2 of them. So while it's quite a long list of actions, I think that actually it's I think certainly on the Performance Committee and the Audit Committee we were fairly assured that the direction was right.
Navina?
Yeah, thank you. So in the context of the transition, I think this is a really important matter, and there may be other issues that we might bring to your attention as a board. If I go back to the point that we made when we heard about the transition to the new organisation, asking ourselves the question, what was HEE set up for? What were we set up for, 9 years ago? To protect certain functions and we made a commitment that we would make sure that we got ourselves in a good place so that those functions continue to be kind of protected and safe in a much larger, newer organisation. So I think this is one area of work where there's a bit of pace needed and a bit of urgency to get something that's fit for transition into the new organisation. So my question, if John was here, I would ask, and I guess I'm asking the rest of the board, whether we are satisfied for the progress on this work to continue to be monitored in Audit Committee, or whether it's sufficiently important that a report should come back to board, excuse me, in a few months' time.
I was waiting towards the end to come in and make my point, and the issue that I wanted some further reassurance on was timescales which appear to have slipped. It plays to the urgency points. I think if I've understood this report properly, and I may not have done, there's a number of actions that were down in the middle column of the action plans under the heading recommendation, where target dates were set, and I just don't have a sense from the update and plans whether we're slightly beyond some of those target dates now. So it plays, and it's a different way of expressing your urgency point, I think, Navina. And what I was going to ask Callum was that we just get clarity about who's monitoring this. Personally, I don't want to escalate this to the board and keep it at the board. I'm completely content. I think there possibly is a decision about who's monitoring the progress on the action plan. Is it the Audit and Risk Committee, or is it the Performance and Business Committee? And at one level, it's not important as long as on behalf of the board it is being monitored, and that sense of pace that Navina's just outlined. And certainly one of my concerns was some of the dates are down for January 22, March 22, and I know we're still in March, but I would want some sense that this is going to be work which is completed this year, and it goes into the new organisation completed. I'll leave it to management to decide whether we need 7 contract managers for contracts of this size, or whether there's almost a business partnering way of doing this. I'm just not sure what the degree of aggregation should be in terms of economies of scale and the size of the job actually that is required here. But I think that does need to be clarified. It didn't leap out that the solution to this was 7 contract managers working with a central contract unit. We might be like an ICS, but we're not an ICS in the number of contracts that we've got. So they were just some of the things that I'd be looking to have some clarity and reassurance on. But Andrew, I think you have your hand up, and then David, I'll come to you again. David F, I'll come to you, sorry.
So the PBC asked about the deadlines and was assured that the deadlines had or would be met. So this is to some extent a document that was written of the time it was written, and that was in the past. So I think, as I understand it, though David F will be more on top of it, we were told it wasn't top. My feeling is that there are 2 issues there. There's the actual audit, there's the monitoring of the KPMG, the response to the KPMG audit. I personally don't feel that this is so remarkable that this shouldn't be done within the audit committee. I think having the input of the FBC was fine and useful, and of the board to be cited is fine and useful, but I personally don't think it's so out of the ordinary that we need to escalate it. There is a deeper fundamental question which I think comes into the transition, and we need to make sure it's in the transition, which is the one that Navina done and Callum touched upon at the beginning, which is that this sort of contract is unusual for NHSE, and therefore, because one of the PBC's questions was actual fact, is there a function within NHSE that we should already be aligning to? And the answer was no, there isn't. They aren't issuing these sorts of contracts, and so it's not that we could sort of start merging on this earlier, if you see what I mean. And so we have got to think about what is the mechanism for this going forward in the new organisation, and to ensure that that's in the new organisation. So I think that's something that should be added to the action log or whatever of the transition team as a meta level discussion. Sorry, that was a bit rambling, but hopefully made some sense.
Rambling at all, Andrew. It was very, very clear, and I think the point that you and Navina are making, this is a function that does not appear to be present in NHSE, and therefore it's a function that we need to develop, and that transfers into NHSE because it's a function that will be required in 23, 24, 25 and onwards, etc. So yeah, okay. David F.
Yeah, I think I agree. I saw it as two things here. One is monitoring the delivery of the recommendations, which we'll also take through our operating delivery group to make sure we're on top of them and then report from that into the exec. But the other side of it is delivering on the actual activity of the contract numbers, which we'll do through the regional improvement forums and therefore report into PBC as we do that. So we will be covered operationally in terms of monitoring and oversight and reporting. It's whether they need escalating anywhere else.
Okay, so again, like Andrew, monitoring of the KPMG report should be kept at Audit and Risk Committee, and monitoring of the activity numbers through Performance and Business Committee. And we keep it at that level, having brought it to the main board. Yeah, okay, all right. Are we good on that? So I think we're asked to note it, I think, for information awareness rating. I think we note, yeah, and confirm the approach that is set out. So that then brings us to the BAF, which will be flexed in light of the discussion that we've just had. I think that's why we place it at this particular point on the agenda, so we can pick up any of the issues that we've considered in a board meeting to be included in the BAF. But who's going to speak to this? Nicola, Lee? Does this need an introduction?
Yeah, happy to do that, David. So this is basically an update from the conversation we've been having around the exec team table over the last few weeks, where we've gone through each of the BAF opportunities to look at where we can provide assurance to the board in response to those opportunities, which obviously is the whole point of the BAF. It's worth saying that this was before we added the KPIs and the objectives to the business plan, which now link directly to the BAFs. So we'll take, when we come back next time to have a conversation around the BAF, we will make sure those are reflected as well. I think they're providing a clearer link through from the work we're doing to the BAF and through to the assurances you require. So I don't think there's much more introduction on that, David, beyond, hopefully the board has had a chance to have a look at this, and any gaps or thoughts about what more you would like to see to provide the assurance you require.
So we're asked colleagues to confirm this. So if you have any questions, please form them. Navina.
Yeah, can I just add that what we're trying to do in the executive team is to keep each BAF opportunity kind of alive and meaningful and related to our business and transition and all the work that we do. So this is the first of the reports that we're trying to capture that live discussion for you. So we'd be really welcome some feedback from non-exec colleagues, especially as to whether this does sort of help and what you'd like to see going forward in this particular report. Just to say, of course, the individual BAF risks or opportunities do go in more detail to the relevant board committees as well. Thank you.
Comments, colleagues? So actually, today's board meeting has ranged over the full scope of our responsibilities, it strikes me. Finance, business, the delivery of education and training in terms of numbers, quantities, etc., transformation, and then transition. So we've covered the full range of activity in today's board meeting to different degrees. I guess the test is, and I think we've improved, not that we weren't doing this anyway, but we've systematised, that's possibly a better way of doing it, the reporting from the committees to the board in the written report and then the oral updates. And we've had something escalated to the board from the Audit and Risk Committee, which is just demonstrating, I think, the organisational maturity point that Andrew reflected on earlier of making this work. So I guess the test is, do we think this report as drafted covers all the risks that we've raised in the conversation that we've just had over the past, what, 2 hours now, coming up to 3 hours, or whether there are things in this back that we've not touched on in the conversation. That's the test, I guess. I didn't think it was telling me anything new by the time I'd got to the end of the conversation, if I'm being truthful, which is probably exactly what you want. But Andrew George, come on, share some wisdom with us.
So I suppose my question is, I mean, this seems a very good description of what we've done or what the executive done and linking it through to the BAF. What I can't tell from it, because that's the question of the executive, is did it focus those discussions for the executive, or is this a retrofit for the discussions that happened that then get segmented into these appropriate pots? That's, you know, that's a question we can't tell from that one. So that perhaps that's a direct question for Navina. Is this a useful tool for the executive to make sure they've covered anything, or is it just a post hoc justification for what's happened?
Shall I take that now, David? Yeah, so actually it was our first attempt. We did a first round. At every exec meeting now, we focus on one BAF and then have a really kind of how does this feel to be alive in the organisation in terms of delivery, reform, all the bits of work that we're doing, and always having a transition lens as well. So I think we're finding our way a bit, but I think it is a reflect. Then Nick then has the headache of trying to capture what we were doing and what we were talking about with the relevant metrics and with the relevant committee and within governance within the organisation into this report. So I don't know whether colleagues in the rest of my exec colleagues would like to describe how it works or how it feels.
I'm conscious we've overshot this by 5 minutes, and I think Liz is joining us. I don't know whether we've got some additional colleagues joining us as well. So I don't want to keep people waiting, but Soraya and Lee, I think, have both got their hands. So let me Lee first and then Soraya, and then rather than opening it up more broadly, I think Andrew's question is a good reflection back to the exec team. So and as you said, Navina, this is work in progress. So why don't we invite you just to take that away as part of the challenge from the board and work with it as you go through this at each exec meeting. But Lee and then Soraya, please.
Yeah, so picking up on Navina's point, it was the first time we've done it. I think we'll get more focused as we go through them and more focused on the actual assurances. And I think the business plan will help us do that. But it is worth pointing out that colleagues at KPMG are doing an audit of the BAF at the moment, how we got here and how we're using it and that sort of thing. That I had a long conversation with them about it yesterday afternoon. So that will also help us make sure that we take this forward properly. And it's worth recognising that NHS England currently don't have a BAF, and we're talking to them as well about how AS works and whether that's something that the organisation we want to look at. So I think there's lots of things going on here as well as the extra assurance work.
Soraya, please.
Yeah, thank you, Sir David. I think really just to pick up, Lee, on your point, one, that NHS England and I don't have a BAF, and how does this then align? But really a question back to the executive, that when you went through the BAF, were there any particular areas of more or greater emphasis that might have come through? I didn't, there's nothing here that we haven't discussed and shouldn't be here, but I just wondered the degree of emphasis. So, for example, the maturity of the ICSs nationally vary, and therefore our ability and the way in which we're working with ICSs will also be variable. So were there any areas that particularly were drawn out? I didn't get a sense of that. And then another example might be, so the work that we're doing with our people, were there any areas that needed more or less in terms of our time commitment and etc.?
So maybe we will structure the next report to reflect that, because there was definitely a discussion about what we wanted to focus on. So Nick, perhaps we could go and look at how we structure the report to draw out sort of, you know, key areas of particular focus.
So thank you for the report, and I think there's one or two steers for further conversations and maybe ways that this can be further developed and iterated as we go forward. But thank you for that. Let me now move on to oh God, I'm ahead of myself in the meetings. Let's go on to the last item. Under item 10, which is the best place to work, and I think this is an update on the work to support colleagues who have a disability who are training to be clinicians, doctors in the main, I think it is. So have we got Liz Hughes with us? I know Liz has championed this issue.
Yep, I'm here, and we've got a group of us, so we're going to get the slides up, and then Giles is going to begin, followed by Wendy, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the practical things that we've done.
I'm conscious of time, colleagues, so let me just say that I think my interest is in, as the executive member, supporting our own staff disability network, and I just wanted to say this is a really positive piece of work. And we welcome colleagues from NHS employers and also Diversity and Ability who've supported us on it. Liz has led it, so she should have the main commentary. And I think the challenge for me and the colleagues on our network is how do we mirror this for our own staff as well as the learners we're supporting. Thanks, David. And Wendy, do you want to make a few?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So thanks very much, and thank you to the board for allowing us to bring this back. I think the last presentation we had on disability was very focused on medical students and doctors, and this is an opportunity to see how we've now focused that to all our health learners. It's also very much testament to the work done by people behind the scenes a bit, the sort of policy and regulation team who've been able to broker a lot of collaboration around this, looking at the evidence and really insisting on a multi-professional approach, which I think is timely. It's also timely that the JMC have just published their first update on their progress towards equality, diversity and inclusion targets, and we welcome their commitment, and we're working closely with them. And one of the statements that they've made is that they want to fundamentally improve the quality of education training and practice environments, and ultimately the quality of care for patients. I think that's a really good statement for all the work that Liz and the team have led. It is important that the board understands that this is work that we can't leverage much effect on our own. What we can do is be leaders and be compassionate collaborators. And I think that's what I think the team have done that brilliantly. It's also really good that we're working hand in hand with the statutory body that is charged with improving the experience for disabled people, and that's the Disabled Students Commission, and I'm really excited about that. And I think the fact that we have a staff network here is really important as well. That triangulation and that support from senior colleagues like Giles is important for our externally facing work as well as the internal work. So I'm going to hand over to Liz now and leave the discussion to her and colleagues, but I just want to note my thanks to the team for this work.
Thanks, Wendy. So if we could just go back a slide, please, which will just show our current disability programme activity. You'll remember after the HE board in 2019, we held a roundtable with support from our colleagues in the HE widening participation team, and we recognised through our ongoing dialogue with the Disabled Doctors Network and the BMA that there was much more to be done around particularly improving the experience of trainee doctors, but also of all other healthcare learners. From my own experience, lived experience of disability, I recognise that actually it isn't the challenge is by no means limited to the medical profession. And so I and others thought it's important how we could make sure that we're adapting our work to meet the needs of all healthcare professions, both graduates and student learners. We need to make sure that all our learners who are disabled or live with a long-term health condition, are neurodiverse, or perhaps even are living with long-term effects of COVID get the right support. This is largely externally facing work, and it will remain a priority because what we do today is impacting the work pipeline for the next 15 years. And you'll see here that we've got 4 pillars of work, vision, we've got the visible delivery, we've worked with diversity and ability, and we're just going to talk around the Find Your Way guide and the adjustment passport, working with the DEC Education Reform Programme and our external stakeholders and the BMA, GMC, and also NHSE and IWDES standards team, and obviously going forward, growing the evidence to build agency. I think it's really important that if we're going to deliver reform and transformation that has a sustained impact on what we do in the future, we have to change how we do things. And so as part of the work of our work on disability, we're also working to make sure that any programmes that we deliver also are disability aware and they're disability confident. And it's very important that we're also working with the system, and that's why we're working with NHS employers, who we'll hear from later. So I'm going to hand now over to Piers Wilkinson from Diversity and Ability to talk about one of our very important products, the Find Your Way guide.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Piers Wilkinson, Policy and Campaigns Lead over at Diversity and Ability. For those that haven't encountered us before, I'll just quickly say we're a disabled-led organisation by and for disabled people. And so at the heart of this particular resource and tool has been working collaboratively with disabled healthcare professionals and learners. And in a little second, I'll share my screen and walk you through the very live resource that is currently available digitally. I just wanted to introduce on that little bit there and say that it has indeed been part of what we have been working together for, and hopefully you can now all see my screen. This is live at the moment and it has been built to support disabled learners and professionals either currently in an undergraduate course or postgraduate course, as well as F1 and F2 professionals in the workplace as well. So this is the homepage. At the top left here, you have accessibility functions that allow disabled learners who may not have resources yet to engage with the resource, and accessibility is at the heart of this, and lived experience is really at the heart of this resource. This landing page introduces and guides individuals into understanding how to navigate the 2 major resources that are available, which is DSA, which can provide up to £25,000 worth of support specifically for each student, and Access to Work, which can provide up to, I believe, £65,000 for working in and around within their placements within their F1 and F2 years. At the bottom as well throughout, we've built in interactivity. So we've got a wonderful little introductory video by myself and Professor Liz talking about our own personal experiences with the support schemes and introducing people to how useful and impactful navigating and engaging with these 2 funding streams for adjustments can be. On top of that, we've worked with disabled professionals within the healthcare professions to have interactive videos, as you can see on the right hand side here, with Sharina Darrell, and we've got a couple of others throughout the resource which allow us to build confidence in disabled learners or people that may not identify as disabled, such as those that are recovering from long COVID and need support in navigating those first steps of engaging with the Equality Act definition and understanding that resource in that way. I've just clicked through to DSA, and as you can see on the DSA, we holistically support them in navigating it. Is written in language. We've got case studies of to help build that confidence and to get them through those first steps of applying through the NHS specific routes, along with glossary of key terms. And it's really been developed, and it's continued to be developed in a way that allows people's experiences to be throughout and to build that confidence in being able to have adjustments in place and engage and succeed within their training and within their placements, and supporting the Trust and NHS England and Health Education England collaboratively to ensure that disabled students are able to thrive in education. So it's quite a lengthy resource, so I haven't got time to go over it all here, but I put a link in the chat box along with a little snippet of the video that you can engage with in your own time. And I really do welcome feedback and information on it, and I'll hand back over here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Piers. We'll move on to the next slide, and Alexandra Ankrum and Paul Dima are going to talk through the overview of our current work, particularly with the Disabled Students Commission and NHS employers.
Thank you very much, Professor Hughes. So I work in the Policy and Regulation team, and it's been a real privilege to be able to use traditional service improvement methodology together with co-production and powered by our commitment to a social model of disability to broker partnership to deal with some of the very real and pressing challenges, particularly early career attrition. Our work with the Disabled Students Commission, which is comparatively new, a statutory body which functions under the auspices of the Office for Students, is really key to our next steps. We're working together to bring forward joint guidance, and this guidance is very much about framing the discussion, moving away from a deficit model and putting the onus upon the system and organisations to do better, to go further much faster, and we do need to do that. Today we're actually joined by Joan Sadler, Director of Partnerships and Equality at the NHS Employers and NHS Confederation. We've teamed up with NHS Employers and NHS Confederation because we believe that their agenda around belonging and inclusion is imperative for us scaling and spreading some of the products that you've heard about today, but also our next steps and our way forward. I'll hand over to Joan Sadler.
I'm not going to say anything too much. Non-executives and board, you'll have heard a lot of the detail, and thank you, Navina and David, particularly for the approach. Good to see you. I will say two things. I think the approach of working through policy and regulation using EDI principles and then really thinking about what's the impact is the right approach. We have to get more used to this agenda not being somewhere off in a corner, but actually relating to the core of the work of the organisation. And I really applaud you for that. I think the second thing is how can we really evaluate the co-production that will be happening and actually socialise this at the same time to the system. That's where we come in as the NHS Confederation group, of which employers is a big part of our group. So we want to land this quickly in real life with HR directors, with people using your system. And that's why I think the approach certainly is one we want to get into partnership with you on. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. So if we move on to the next slide, we have three questions for consideration by the board as a result of this presentation, which we would like you to think about and give us some comments if you felt able. Really, are the board content with the direction of travel, including the focus on supporting the transition of learners into the NHS workforce? To note the form and content of the short joint guidance we are developing with the Disabled Students Commission, and whether the board would like to see a draft of this guidance to be brought forward. And obviously, as you can see, we've been fortunate to work with a wide variety of stakeholders, but have we missed any? And does the board think there are stakeholders that we should prioritise? I'd like to hand back to Sir David to take these questions.
Dawn, very nice to see you. Piers, nice to meet you. Alexander, nice to meet you. Liz, fantastic, well done. So let's open it up. We've got the private board meeting started at 12:35. I'll end this meeting at 12:30. So let's I'm not going to invite question and answers, Liz. You've asked us some questions, so I'm just going to let board colleagues come back to you, and then you can capture those and take them away. So we've got all the Andrews lined up first, which is rather predictable on this board. So Andrew Foster, please.
Okay, thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and as good a piece of work as I've seen on this subject anywhere. So I really have no challenges or criticisms or anything at all. My question, and I speak as the chair of the People Committee of HEE, which is in people we talk about our own staff. Now you talk about 20% of adults having some form of disability. By my rough calculation, that would mean there's around 600 members of HEE staff have some form of disability. So my question really, all this richness that you have here, which is aimed at learners outside HEE, to what extent is it, or can it be available for staff inside HEE?
Liz, don't. You'll end up just answering a whole bunch of questions if we're not careful.
Okay,
if we've got
so
time,
that's helpful. We'll collate them and we can pull that into our further work. That would be great.
I'll give you the last word, Liz. You're okay.
No, it's fine.
Andrew George.
Thank you. Nice to be Andrew the second this time. Very, very supportive of this report, as Andrew said. I guess one thing, first of all, you asked for other people you should be connecting with. I wonder whether UK and the Association of Colleges, which we're already connecting with, but actually since they do a lot of our education in collaboration with us, that we should. They seem to be a body, and they have a slightly less regulatory role perhaps than the Office for Students, which is more frightening when they walk into universities than UK are. But my substantive question was around alignment with the education reform programme, which is quite right. What I wanted to explore was the extent to which this agenda is informing that programme rather than reacting or checking on the programme. So, for example, much of what we're talking about in HEE around what are the skills that professionals need to support the patients, rather than those silos of how do we maintain those silos of professionals around patients, might be the sort of thing that this would feed rather well into, actually as part of the generative early stages of it, and therefore are we embedding it in the early stages of our reform programme rather than checking that it's okay at the end, if you see what I mean. Thank you.
Very interesting, Andrew. Some emergent evidence, isn't there, about people who are neurodiverse benefiting from distance learning, and obviously as we begin to transform some of the means of education, then your point is about let's shape that agenda based on some of the work that Liz and colleagues have taken us through. One of the questions that occurred to me reading the presentation, Liz and colleagues, was I think it might play to Andrew Foster's point about numbers. How do we get a sense of what the impact of some of this work is? And at what point do we begin to see whether we are driving improvements through this work? Liz, I remember the dinner we had in Senate House where a number of young women who were going through their medical education who had a disability came and talked in a very honest and quite searingly brutal way, quite frankly, about what their lived experience was of going through education and training. And Liz, I just wanted to congratulate you and colleagues in HEE and Joan, you and colleagues, for just the way that this work has advanced. I think it's absolutely terrific, and Andrew Foster said it's as good a presentation on this issue that is seen. Well, I've not seen all that many, but actually the way that you've matured it, Piers with your organisation, Joan with your organisation, I think is real leadership, Liz. So a big thank you for me for just picking this up, because it's not like you've not got anything else to do in the responsibilities you've got in Health Education England. I'm so full of admiration for the way that you've developed this programme. It's absolutely terrific. So if there's nobody else flagging to speak, Liz, please have the last word.
Well, thank you very much, Sir David, for the opportunity to present this to the board. It's been extremely helpful, the feedback that we've had, and we'll take that on board to actually further develop the programme. I, pay tribute to all of the people that have worked with me, because everybody's been passionate about this work and delivering it, and I think we've really managed to break into some of the perhaps more difficult stakeholder conversations that we haven't managed before. So that's been great, and that's because of having a wide stakeholder base. So thank you to all the team that have worked with me, and thanks to the board for giving us this opportunity to speak about our work. And we certainly would welcome any further feedback, and particularly if you look at the tool and you think there's anything that we can further develop, and if there's anything further that that you would like to comment, then please feel free to email me or contact me. And we're keen for any input, so that we can make this the best that we can. So thank you very much.
Liz, thanks. I'm sure colleagues that have some reflections will come back to you and help contribute to the building of this response. But perhaps, Nicola, we might get a slot in towards the spring of next year, just as a way of tracking this through. We started something here about 2-3 years ago now, and I think this is one of the things we need to take with us into NHS England and say, actually, we do want to see this enshrined in the new organisation. There's been good work here, and I, for one, am not prepared to let this just drift away on the long list of urgent things to do on a transition, which means that good ideas get left somewhere. So we need to make sure that we do take this with us when we go, and it's embedded in the organisation. So a big thank you to colleagues for this. And bring us some data later in the year as well, won't you, Liz? When you come back, bring us some data. All right, thank you. John Sadler, lovely to see you. Thank you for your support on this. Piers, thank you very much. Alexandra, very nice to meet you. I loved your passion alongside Liz's, and means we're in a good place to see this transition onwards. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, and bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think that gets us to the close of business. So thank you, colleagues, one and all. Thanks to the exec team for the reports and the clarity of the conversations. Actually, a number of you have presented today, which has been beautifully clear. So thank you very much for that. Let's formally end the meeting, Nicola. Thank you. And I think we've got 5 minutes, so hopefully you can't quite get your lunch in 5 minutes. Or if you can, I'll get Wendy to frown at you for